So I'm going to call the Amherst Finance Committee meeting to order, and this is the meeting of March 21st, and it is 7:05 p.m. To thank everybody who's here, and I want to thank Mayor Garrick and Rob Detweiler from the schools for being here to answer questions about the regional school budget first, and then to talk about the Amherst public school budget. And the regional school budget, the committee knows, and most members were present, and others have received this by email. We're there on Saturday, March 3rd, for the presentation at the Four Towns meeting. So I suggested that we start there because it's really an opportunity if there are any additional questions from that presentation, but we would not want to ask that you remake the presentation that you previously made, and that was really when the budget was presented to us and to the other towns. So with that, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add before, let's see if there's members of the committee with questions.
No, I think the only thing to add is that we've successfully had the Amherst and the regional budgets, and Pelham as well, formally passed by the school committees at this point. And so the information that was presented at the four-town meeting is the most current, information.
So, and other thing is that Doug Slaughter had asked to be able to make a statement before we actually got into discussion.
Yes. So, as usual, I'm just making this partly for the viewing audience, but as just a general matter of course, as an employee of the schools, I'm going to recuse myself from any of the conversation about the school budgets, and then also, if we take any votes, either now or later, I will also recuse myself from that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let the minutes also reflect Doug's statement. So, Mary Lou.
One other thing you wanted to say about the assessment has been completed.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. So do you want to just talk about the assessment has also been?
Oh, the assessment methodology has been voted by the school committee?
Yeah. So that's go on record with that here.
Okay, yes, they voted to use the alternate method specified in the regional agreement and find your average allocation.
Thank you.
And that was an additional document that was presented at the last meeting and that I had sent to the committee by email after receiving it from Rob, which was projections for future years about the enrollments for the four towns within the current region, so that we could get a sense of what's in store for the assessments. And it looked from the way it might play out that the Amherst share would proportionally increase for over the next several years before leveling down again. But in 14 and 15, it looked to me as if it would be an increase. Is that what your thought was, Rob?
Yeah, I didn't bring a document with me, unfortunately, but there's a graph there that kind of shows how that plays. And it does.
Yeah. So to point that out.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So, I didn't have any additional questions because I think we had an opportunity that day to ask questions, and it was a pretty thorough discussion, but I didn't know if there's anybody else in the committee before we, on the region budget, with any questions. Yes, Janice.
Thank you. On this handout from that day, page 18, the budget by function, under the expense accounts, there were a few items, the special education,
Yes.
the other programs, and then the last line of other programs in the Georgia, that had increased quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could maybe you
Sure.
talked about it, but.
Well, and I can speak to the special education, and then I think, so you said other programs, and what was the third?
Yeah, the last line, other programs in Pajolican.
Okay,
There
so
are two other
I'll start
programs.
with special education, and then I think you can probably speak to the other two more fully than I can. In terms of special education, we had a few students this year who ended up in out-of-district placements. And without going to a lot of specifics, one student can cost a couple $100,000 for that placement, which in this case was that level of expense. So these costs are due to a small number of students who required services at a level greater than what we were able to provide within the school system. And that's the reality of our costs nowadays related to placements, which are cost really anywhere from a day placement of around $40,000 to $50,000 to a residential placement. I think our most expensive is $240,000 with additional resources of additional adult support. So all said and done, it's over $300,000 of a residential placement.
Yes.
So, because you're not identifying any students, but on that type of placement, can you kind of just give us an idea of what a student gets for that?
Sure. For a residential placement, a student is living in a facility or within a home with a school component. And it's typically for students who have a high level of, in our case, medical needs, as well as supervision that requires 24-hour services, so that they are able to benefit from just from the educational placement. So the decision of why a student would need a residential placement is because for them to be able to benefit from school, they need 24-hour support, consistency, programming. So often, and not necessarily this case, but often it's students with very significant medical, physical disabilities, as well as in other cases, it's students where the risk is high for self-harm or harming of others. But usually it's very low incidence disabilities. Very few students rise to that level of need for programming. When they do, it's very expensive.
And the system is required to provide that till the age of 21,
Yes,
or is it beyond that?
until the 22nd birthday.
Up to the 22nd birthday.
Yes,
So now,
21.
what happens to 22 in February?
So
Who
there's a level
takes
of
over?
transition planning that happens with agencies typically, depending on the student's need. It could be the Department of Mental Health, it could be the Department of Mental Retardation, but they're calling it Developmental Services now, DBS, I think. Or in some cases, mass rehab. Some students are going into or staying in a restricted placement, supported now financially by those agencies. In other cases, their families are carrying a huge burden. There aren't a lot of resources out there for adult support, unfortunately. So it's usually a really difficult transition period for people. So we plan well in advance for our students multiple years prior and have agencies partnering with us if at all possible.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And will that enable us in a future year to get some of it back as circuit breaker?
Yeah, so we're able to, I think the foundation is around 40,000 now. So for any student whose services are high cost above the foundation level, which is around $40,000, we are able to receive, I want to say it's 62% reimbursement on top of that. But when you're talking about, depending on the level of cost, 62% plus the 40,000 foundation, the school district still carries the bulk of the burden financially.
But that is additional revenue, and we would not receive that until the following year, is that correct?
Yes,
And
and then we apply it the following year to support the budget.
Exactly.
So when we look, for instance, at out-of-district costs, that's the portion that's supported by the assessments. There's another $465,000 expenses for next year supported by circuit breaker, which is the amount of circuit breaker revenue that we brought in this year.
So I think the overall out-of-district line is like 1.7 million.
Yeah, 1.75.
If that's okay. Thanks, good memory, huh? And so, and it is offset with, we're able to apply circuit breaker. And I don't think we do the exact line anymore, but I don't know if it's that line or staffing. So,
Let me just, I see Bob, let me just tell Anurag, what we're doing right now is that, I don't know if you were at the Four Towns meeting on March 3rd, when the regional budget was presented, and if not, we had sent that material out. So what we're doing is we're focusing first on the regional budget. So if you have questions about the regional budget from that presentation, or the materials that you received either at that day or by email, that's what we're doing now. So just to catch you up. Thank you. Bob, you had a question.
Oh, so let me just make sure I understand the math. That if a student briefing costs $60,000, the town pays the first 40, and then you get 62% reimbursement of the 20.
right, and what we pay the full tuition,
Right.
but we'll receive reimbursement on the cost above $40,000. We'll get 62% of that back.
Now,
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yep.
each year the foundation amount changes a bit.
Mhm.
This is a notable year because we broke the 40,000 mark.
Yeah.
And then the percentage of reimbursement is dependent on the legislature voting a budget to support it.
And they had hoped for,
Sure.
I think we started with a $32,000 foundation, and I think it was hoping to be 70% reimbursement, 75%, but it hasn't.
It ended up as 40 and
Yeah, and then it
62%
went-
was
exactly.
the compromise. Okay, got it. It's a wild card every year.
It
It is
is,
a wild card.
and I think you had,
And
we
that's how
wanted
we
to answer.
stagger the use of those revenues to
Yeah.
offset, because we want to make sure we have what we're going to have. before we commit. So there's a couple other lines you wanted to hear about, and I think one of them was other programs,
Yes.
which goes up 149,000. Wow. That is in part an offset, an accounting thing. This year, we used choice money to support district tuitions in other programs, notably Oak, Choice and Charter. And next year, we're moving to better accounting standards and applying those revenues to salaries, teacher salaries. So when you look at the total salaries line up here, it's going down 498,000, 89,000, excuse me. That's because we're offsetting that with some of these choice revenues. And we're not offsetting the out-of-district tuitions for both Choice and Charter anymore. So that's why that goes up. It's an
It's
offset.
not a true increase.
It's just an offset.
For accounting.
Moving 470,000 from one place to the other. And then I think the other one you were looking at was
Control accounts.
control accounts. Okay. So in control accounts, it's where we put funds for contingencies we may need. And so there are contingencies in there for awarding a leave for a teacher, take a sabbatical. There's a contingency in there for the outcome of labor negotiations. There's a contingency in there for maternity leave, and a few other things like that. So that's where they start, and then once we know where, if they're needed, we can move them up into the correct budget.
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything additional? Looking around. The silence is really because I really think he did. Kay, you did have something.
Well, I just want to, make clear to myself that you are reducing some staff, but also there's a reduction in the number of students at the school, right?
Absolutely. In many cases, the first place we're really looking is where are we able to reduce staff based on the declining enrollment. So there are many cases we're able to remove sections based on the declining enrollment, which corresponds to people. However, it is based on numbers of students. So we're able to maintain class sizes at a consistent level and such. Yeah. Yes.
Interact.
I don't know, maybe this is not the right time to ask it, but How's the morale in the school?
It depends on who you're asking. Honestly. But overall, we've been involved with budget reductions for 5 or 6 years now. This year, while there are reductions, we work really hard to make those where we are able to through retirements or attrition. So we're really cautious in that way, if at all possible. And this is given that it's not a new event for people. I think the better job that we do of not making this more painful by a lot of multiple meetings and dragging people through really hard conversations of who is this going to be. I think we've it's sad to say, but we've become better at the process so that we minimize the struggle for the people involved. Not to say that it isn't very difficult for people to know that either they'll be losing a part of their job or their job, clearly, but our staff are very professional and they focus on the role that they need to stay focused on for the rest of the year, which is educating our kids. So we try to do it well, and they do a good job with sitting with what the priority is. Never easy.
I guess I did have one thing that I thought about. I remember you saying that when you at the four-time meeting that when you were talking about reducing the computer teacher at the middle school, that it was really offset because you were moving the computer programs into the
Yes.
classrooms, and it's just a different way of addressing the same material. But I was left with wondering whether the physical education teacher loss is reflected in the reduction in the number of students, or if there's a real diminution of physical education for that age group.
Sure. So first, the assistive tech or technology in general, I just want to say that's definitely the plan that we have a new assistive tech person. We had someone before. The person we brought in now is really, we're thinking about a system-wide approach by building teams of technology people within each school that then models the use of technology within the classroom, so it's closer to the content, which really helps kids to understand the connection versus having a discrete class where you're learning to use a tool but you're not applying it in the same beneficial way. So that's very solid. The phys ed is a hard one. It is reducing the amount of physical education that students are receiving at the middle school level to the level that's consistent with the elementary level, which is, I'm not going to remember the exact minutes, but it is half of the direct PE time. It's fairly consistent with, some schools have the amount of time that we're going to. Some schools have the amount of time that we currently have. The dilemma is for a system like ours where we value the comprehensive experience for kids to have drama and art and the level of music that we have currently in what I used to call shop, but I think they call it tech ed. The dilemma is if you want to maintain that and have the amount of PE time that we have, which is not on, I'm getting a little technical, but it's not on the rotation. Like there's a rotation that has drama, those sorts of things. If you want to have them off of the rotation and have as much time that they have right now, you're not able to build in time for intervention and differentiation for kids, which we desperately need to meet the needs of all of our kids. So we're able to fit the PE on the rotation if we reduce the time and maintain drama, art, sort of comprehensive nature of our schools. So it is a bit of a trade-off, but when we think about our priorities, we need to be able to balance the need to have time for pre-teaching, reteaching, intervention, and enrichment or stretching kids who are able to go a little deeper. So that's what we were building into this new schedule. I asked the school committee to trust me on the fact that over the next few months I'm working with Betsy Dinger and Mike Malone, who are the administrators of the middle school, because we're thinking of more creative ways to implement movement activities within the school day. So we're going to maintain our phys ed block. We know we're going to increase health because we don't have enough health instruction. So we're able to do those two things, and we have to think about kids at the middle school don't have a traditional recess any longer. So they don't have space right now for a recess, other than going out and sitting on the hill. So we're trying to look at lunchtime, recess time, and we're also trying to look at some of the programming that our occupational therapists and physical therapists have about how do you integrate movement activities into the instructional time during the day. There are ways to actually have kids moving while you're teaching versus sitting in chairs the whole time. So it's not the same as phys ed, but it is an option. We're also looking at the potential of creating opportunities like physical fitness space in the middle school where you might be able to provide opportunities during the day where kids can go and use different equipment like treadmills and such. I don't know the words because I rarely get to use those. But those type of experiences, and as silly as it sounds, one of the schools that one of our staff just came back from in Arizona, you know, kids have a 5-minute passing time, and they do, a voice comes over and says, okay, let's move to your next class. And they literally put music on, and the kids and staff move and dance to the next class. It's about how to think about changing the culture of the school. So I've asked them to trust me that it's not throwing out physical activity. It's about trying to find balance with what we value and meet the priorities of our student population right now. So that's where we're sitting at the moment.
Janice?
Do a lot of students do sports in addition?
Yes, thank you for saying that, because yes, also we're working with the universities to bring in more intramural opportunities after school. Lots do, but there are clearly some who do not, who would benefit from moving around a bit. But we also now have our after-school programs. So many kids who were going home and doing it, whatever they do at home, looking at screens or whatever, now they are just more active by the nature of being at school for a longer period of time. So it's about how do you kind of integrate that in there as well. But thank you for bringing that one up.
Yeah, and part of the reason I asked, and I was looking at you, Mary Lou, because when you write it up, the temptation, because I think it generally is an accurate description for town meeting, is that the administration has done a good job of dealing with budget cuts and the reduction in enrollment to try and maintain programming without loss of programming. And then when I looked at it, this was the one area where I was kind of left uncertain as to whether that's really an accurate statement.
And I can help with some of the language as well. And when you look at other school districts, often the districts that have more phys ed time, they don't have the same range of offerings. So they don't have the languages, and they may not have drama or the level of art. Yeah, art, band, orchestra, chorus. So there's some trade-offs that I think that schools do have to make. So I think we've kind of tried not to, but I can help with that language, and I'd be happy to.
We're planning on working together. Could I follow up on the phys ed? Years ago, the athletes were exempt from phys ed the semester that they were on a team. I don't know if that qualifies now in terms of the state requirements for phys ed, and if we do that, and if that's some way that's worked in.
We have, my understanding, I had, I won't say it's a deep conversation on this topic. The middle school, I know that does not happen. High school, I believe it does not happen currently, where if a student is in a sport that they receive credit for. But I think that many school districts do meet some of those requirements by actually doing that. So it is a question of whether we should be.
Well, to follow up, the instructors didn't particularly like that because they liked the athletes in gym with other kids and being role models. So I realize there was discussion, but it was done at one time.
So that would be.
Okay.
You think about the Alps program? Do you remember
No,
Alps?
the Alps was something else. But
That was something else. That was
the Alps was
We
good
still
too.
have that.
Alternative
Yes.
learning.
all right. Good
Yeah.
program.
Yeah. Yes, we do still have that. But there are some ways that I think when students are in sports that you can enroll them and they receive credit for that. And many schools do that. My understanding is we have not in the recent years done that. Whether that might be more of a full discussion around that, I think absolutely.
Yeah. Other questions on the region budget? Enron?
I'm not sure, I'm sorry I was a little late, I apologize, I may have missed this discussion already. You know, you're obviously, you know, trying to do a very difficult job of balancing a lot of multiple kinds of needs and demands in a shrinking budget environment. And I'm wondering if there's any room in this, but I mean, you know, eventually that big bad wolf, the OPEB, is going to kind of show up someplace. Is there any room to squeeze that into your budget, or you know, because if you were to fully account for OPEB in this budget, what would that look like? I mean, do you have any sense
Do you
about
want to
that?
start?
Sure.
I can jump in as
It
well.
would look really nasty right now. But we're also going through a transition phase where the superintendent is reorganizing how the schools do business, if you will. So I think there's an opportunity as we go for the next couple of years to get that house in order, streamline it, and create the possibility, if not the opportunity, to be able to start funding OPEB, at least slightly, to start working on that problem without sinking the whole budget.
So that's, so Rob's statement around building it into the budget as, showing that in the appropriated budget isn't, very true. It's over time. We will be able to do that. Right now, we did talk about if there is a healthcare premium holiday, which we anticipate in April.
Yep.
The regional funds that will be realized from not having to, or be freed up, I should say, by not having to pay in for that month. The plan would be to have those funds be going into E&D and to replenish some of the support that we use for the budget, but also Rob and I have talked about making a recommendation to the regional school committee that they consider taking a portion of those funds and beginning to pay that obligation, to make the gesture of whether it's $100,000 and put that in. But we haven't gone further yet because we haven't seen what those figures are exactly going to look like, and the school committee has to vote that.
So do you have a sense of how many years it might be before that cost begins to be fully absorbed into the budget?
Oh,
No,
what is that now?
That's a fraction. It's like,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
The school committee and the budget and finance subcommittee have not really had that discussion yet. Just on the radar, pushing in that direction. We know we have to do it.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand. It's very painful right now. Even without looking at the OPEB, it's quite painful.
Right.
And from the town's larger finances point of view, as many of my colleagues are well aware, that is a pretty big thing that we have to solve jointly as a town. And part of the reason, part of the reason why it's been growing so much is because it's been off the books for most departments, for good reasons maybe, but it's been off the books, so it just keeps growing in the shadows. While we think that we are working really hard to keep the operating budgets in line, and all the discipline on the operating side, I think is being undermined by this amount growing in the shadows. So sooner or later we have to absorb that bring that into the light and start kind of dealing with it. And of course that is going to have a pretty significant effect on top of the significant effect we already are feeling with the restraint so I just want to kind of I think we're going to have a conversation about this later today in this committee, but I wanted to kind of raise that.
Absolutely.
And I know you are thinking about it, but I wanted to kind of hear what your thoughts were on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, let me follow up and then kind of ask Mary Lou. The follow-up is fairly quick. When we get to that item, which is item 2, we're on 1A of the agenda. When we get to item 2, it will be about OPEB. Much of it is as Sandy's going to be consulting us about the meeting with the actuary who just has done the new updated report for the town, and I think it was the same actuary who's done the analysis for the region, so I guess the question is whether there'd be any objection to asking questions when he comes about his calculations for the region.
Sure, that'd be fine.
And, yeah, let's see, it was Bob who was,
Well, I'm wondering if it would be useful to meet, have some type of meeting with the school committee. Many are new.
Mm-hmm.
They are into this. Some are there and don't believe it. But I think it's necessary. Sandy did that. I'm not volunteering your services, but I think at some point we need to be talking with them. If in their subcommittee on finance they're not dealing with this, it has to be there.
Conversations. See, and they have had multiple conversations. We have some of our school committee members are also on the budget coordinating group. So we've been engaged in the conversation. I think we've come to a more common ground on that topic now. But again, what that means in terms of the amount and the schedule, we have not kind of stepped into that. But no, we would welcome Sandy coming and speaking to the committee and helping to educate all of us, hopefully.
Are you going to have Mr. Stone come and present to the school?
I might as well jump into it now.
yeah, you might as well just go ahead.
So the short answer is yes. He is available any of the next 3 Thursdays to come in. So it's really just a matter of the committee deciding when it is it'd be most convenient for you to hear from him. So he will address the finance committee. We will invite anybody else who wants to come. Specifically, initially, that really centered on the select board because I think in past years there's been a joint finance committee select board meeting on this, but that's because the presentation from the actuary in previous years was done at a different time of year, not right before town meeting. So trying to schedule a joint meeting with those two committees at this time of year was just too much. So they will be invited to attend. Certainly the school committee will be invited to attend. His contract calls for him having to do a presentation to us. He and I were discussing whether that meant 1 or 2, i.e. whether he would also have to come back and talk directly to the school committee. We're still working that out. But I think it is, he is the same person who did both the town and the regional valuation, so he can speak to issues in both reports.
That would be helpful.
It was really useful last time we had a joint meeting, previous group. And I'd love for him to, if not present to the school committee independently, at least talk with them about the region's situation at a joint meeting.
Yeah, I mean, what happened last time was that it was done at one of the 4 boards meetings in October when you presented your report, which then brought all of the boards and committees together present. And so the question that you and I talked about was whether we really wanted to wait that long or whether we needed to get the presentation in order to be able to obtain the information to present it to town meetings so that we could make them realistic as they're facing lots of requests for money from these outside warrant articles. And that was sort of the balance that we'll be talking about.
So I guess the issue will come down to when is, if of these next 3 Thursdays, if those, again, if we're trying to do it before town meeting, getting some sense of who on the committee would be here or not be here, and which of those meetings makes is most convenient. And then, I mean, certainly I think inviting the school committee to be part of that meeting too.
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I like it at the same time too, I think it would be helpful for them to hear, see the larger picture.
Do you think it matters to them which these upcoming Thursdays we held it?
Hold tomorrow, perhaps.
Yeah, I have to just look, I'd have to look and see if I have any committee meetings those nights, and that would be, but I could look at that, you know, tonight before we go.
First Thursday is a Pelham meeting.
So we're looking at the 28th, the
28th,
4th,
the
and
4th,
the
or
11th.
And it's,
We're starting to vote articles on the 4th.
we sort of talked about that. We may put it off to try and get some, a lot of these petition articles done and just do it all of the voting on the 11th, and I was going to talk about that in a little bit. We're under a really tight schedule, which is why I has sort of had mixed feelings about getting the actuary in as early as we're talking about and trying to do it before town meeting. And that's part of our discussion that we have to have as a committee, is the benefits of having that presentation before we go to town meeting versus the burden that it puts on us with all of the other articles that we still have to consider.
Just, Andy, my question would be, it's not going to be in our report anyway, is it? It's going to be, I would think that this could be something that's said at town meeting that probably you or someone else would be talking about. So what would be the possibility of having it on April 25th? That's still before town meeting. It still gives whoever's going to speak to this issue for town meeting, unless you're planning to have it in a written report somewhere.
But we normally would put it in the report. That's a discussion. Why don't we postpone that discussion for a few minutes so we can stay with the agenda a little bit more closely. And if there's no further questions about the regional school budget,
I apologize for derailing that conversation.
that's okay. We derail conversations all the time ourselves, as you know. But then the other second part of the presentation, is which we don't have the same advanced materials on as the elementary school.
I can pile mine with that, so that way that people can get it all in one pile. So this is one. This is one? Yeah, this
One
one.
full packet.
Yeah, one full packet. Oops. There should be two in mine that I'm getting. Make sure you're doing, yeah, there's two.
Oh, it's two.
Yes,
Excuse
because
me.
I'm just getting the full package. Hmm?
And I guess
I think you're okay
here
in that
there's,
direction.
for people who are watching on Amherst
I
Media,
think you need to keep those.
I already have one.
Yeah, but I only gave you one of those two handouts.
there's two. People who are watching on Amherst Media, just wanted to let you know that the budgets for the regional schools and the town's elementary schools are fairly well posted on the arps.org website. They're under administration, there's a budget section, and so that the budgets that we're talking about may or probably or will be available, I suspect, on the website.
All of this information is there.
Oh,
So, could I just ask how it would be helpful to, I could ask Rob to walk through some of the figures, and then I'd be happy to, if the committee would want me to, hit some of the high points from the presentations, or I could not. I just don't want to assume that you want a mini presentation, because if you don't, it's really fine. So, I don't know how the committee would like to.
I will bring around to the other members of the committee. I think that you have to do it in the way that is most comfortable for you. What would be helpful in addition to the figures is to just have a little bit of a sense of the policy implications and trade-offs that needed to be made in the development of the budget. And because in the end, where town meeting is always concerned is not only how much it's costing us, but how's it affecting our schools, which town meeting does care about.
Let me just,
Could I start you to go and then
I'll
I
just
go
give an
next?
overview.
Oh, perfect,
and then
okay.
you can let me know what happens. Okay, so I'm going to give you an overview of the financial picture. On page 5, we're looking at consolidated.
Which
The
document?
big one.
The big balance, yeah, the 2014 budget. Page 5 is a consolidated spending plan with the general fund appropriation on the far left, and also reflecting grant expenditures and expenditures from revolving funds, so you get a whole picture. We've turned the page 7, now we're looking strictly at the general fund, and we're looking at the level services budget, similar to what we looked at for region earlier. So the FY14 budget is essentially taking what was happening in October and rolling it forward to next year with known or anticipated increases. Which would bring us down to an increase of $1,087,000.
I'm sorry, what page?
Page 7, excuse me. Well, that's pretty rich, and the committee had given us the guidance to limit the increase to 2% increase, which indicated we needed to cut $656,000. Okay, so these changes that you see between 13 and 14, I just want to go quickly through. There's an increase of $10,000 to salaries, but that's offset by $145,000 charged to the Choice Revolving Fund, which is new for us next year. If you're looking at the expenses in special education going up $103,000, that's almost entirely, again, tuition out. On the other hand, we look at other programs going up $155,000. That's an increase of $170,000 for charter tuition, net charter tuition, reimbursed in the town, but a decrease of $18,000 from Choice. So that's what that piece is. Other big pieces would be, that would be retiree health insurance. And what happened there is we usually have 2 new retirees entering the pool for non-teachers and 7 new teacher retirees entering the pool.
How big is the pool?
I couldn't tell you offhand. It's
For professional staff, probably, I'm trying to think about it, it's 400 total, but I'm not sure what it would be.
this is
specifically
retirees,
for
so yeah.
Oh, retirees, I'm
Right.
sorry, I was speaking to staff.
The next big item is other operation services. It's risk and benefits, really. So we're looking at retirement incentive payment of $115,000, sick leave buyback for people retiring, $34,000. So that's an increase of $183,000. And similar to the other budget, we looked at the control accounts. That's provisions for expenses. We don't know exactly where they're going to go yet, but it would include $30,000 for professional leave. There's a provision for salary adjustments pending the outcome of negotiations, maternity leave, and a few other things like that. Okay. So that's what gets us up to this increase of $1 million. That's to get the 2%. Now I need to cut that staggering amount. So
I'm sorry, could you explain that? I'm sorry. So it's increase of $1 million.
correct. But
That's about approximately 4 or 5%. You
yes.
know, so that's a, and then the one below that is what changed from previous year, 431. What is that?
So to reach the guidance the town issued of coming with a budget that increased only 2%, we'd have to reduce that level of services budget by $656,000. And the 431 is what a 2% increase would be. Okay.
And the 2% was because the previous year we asked for some bridge funds, one-time funds, because we were starting school choice. So we asked for and we received a little bit over $200,000, which we greatly appreciated. So now that amount was just taken off of, so it's not that we were receiving a lower level of increase than the other town departments.
Correct. So, see how that plays out. If you turn to page 47, you see we have this new revolving fund. Bring in revenues for this year and budgeted expenditures from that fund for next year. So you'll see we're budgeting to support classroom instruction with $145,000 from this fund next year, which I mentioned a little while ago when we looked at the overall payroll pictures. I mentioned it's being supported by the $145,000 from choice. That's new. So hopefully that'll grow and be more of a stabilizing force.
Yes.
On those salaries, it isn't specific, it's not required to be specific to a teacher, it's just in the salary fund.
Well, actually, in the budget, line budget, if you get that far, we don't have it tonight,
No.
it'll be, math teacher in Wildwood.
But is there a requirement that it's used though for the specific people that are serving kids? It's
The best practice is that use the funds to support teaching positions.
so
Right,
it's not
in general,
specific to choice.
But not specific to choice where children are in those classrooms.
Oh, no.
Okay,
Teaching
that's
does.
what I was curious
Yeah,
about.
that would get
Crazy.
crazy, exactly right.
Okay, I think question.
Yeah.
The control account, which in the old days was 1,000 and is now 637. What's happening there? I'm sorry, on page 7.
Yeah. Okay, so by the time we get into FY13, well, start out, we had a couple things happen. We knew where the increases to salaries was going to happen, so everything got moved up to the budget lines that belong in.
And these are
Yeah.
out.
And here, we're projecting, we don't know where that's going to go yet.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you saw the voted budget in FY09, you would have seen a much larger number, but
Gotcha.
it's
This
pretty
is
actual,
your-
it's already
yeah.
been
Right. So
placed where it needs to be.
it's all
Provisional
distributed.
Yeah.
Do you refer to that by something else? What was the D&D account?
D&D is our reserves.
Issue resource.
Yeah, but control accounts is kind of it's just a line where you dump it for, until you're ready to,
Like a
Right,
buffer.
either. Got
But
it.
E&D
Well-
only applies to the region.
Yes,
yes.
it's one's balance sheet, one's.
We learn that every year.
They're not really buffers because we're pretty sure we will need those funds. We just
Okay.
don't know where yet. So, for
Right.
instance, maternity leave. We don't know
Who will
who,
become president?
right? So which
But
one to put it
typically
into?
someone does.
Yeah.
Odds are.
So,
Though I do know that if we are successful in convincing voters to create a region that a spin-off benefit is, then we can use the same terminology for both budgets, and we don't have to do it on two
Yes, that
different
would be
budgets.
nice. So, would you like me to go into
so
or do you have more to?
that's so the question is, how do you get down to the 2% increase? And I think page 17 will give you where we ended up, and we can tell you how we got there.
Is it, is it fine with the committee if I take 5 minutes just to give a little bit of an overview?
Sure.
Okay, so I think probably the first packet to look at is the one that has mission and vision on the front. And this was the first presentation to the school committee related to the budget. So I'll just kind of hit a few high points to give some context to the decision-making process. So let me find mine. So really where we started with the committee was to talk about, what is a mission and vision, and that kind of shapes what you're trying to achieve in a district, and it focuses our collective work. So we started with that concept, And then we talked about, so we know where we want to go, and then we need to look at some demographic information, achievement data, and some models of what's considered best practice to say, so where are we right now in our schools? And then we created a district improvement plan, which many of you have heard. I just referenced it briefly on page 2, that we have a district improvement plan, which is a roadmap. It creates the goals, it includes the goals, so we know where we are, we know where we want to be. Here's our roadmap. So I summarized for the committee of where we've been over the past few years, the level of budget support we received, and that we have appreciated working collaboratively as part of the town through the budget coordinating group, very collaboratively. So the challenge, I said, is always to really maintain the programming and services that we consider vital while we're recognizing a change in our student population, while we're in most cases reducing, because we're trying to stay within the reality of where we're all sitting financially. So it's always a challenge to do that and do that well. So, but we've met the challenge, and I feel like we've done a fairly good job over the years of not making reductions that would affect our students. So we talked a little bit on page 4, we just talked a bit about, so how do we start a process? It's a very long process, as you all know, and I won't take you step by step through. But I pointed out to the committee that we really focus on realizing efficiencies, which, as you all know, because we all share Ron Bahanowitz, he's really done a great job with helping us to realize some of those efficiencies, which are paying off in dollars at this point. We also are trying to become more efficient in the use of time by just putting in place things like web-based technologies, which I know Doug can't speak, but our information system does a great job with putting new technologies that really allow us to use our time much more efficiently. So then I talked to the committee about, but we have a new fiscal reality. We have we have a financial reality that we need to live within. No longer can we be sitting in a situation where we continue to grow without being really smart about how we are growing and changing, because there are some ways to reduce some of the ongoing costs so that you can actually make changes in your system. So we have some challenges, however, in our current situation, and they will be challenges moving forward, I believe. We received stimulus funding over for a number of years, and that really has ended now. Also, we've seen a decline in the availability of competitive grants for us, and the amount of money we have received in entitlement grants has been reduced. So if you look just quickly at page 6, you'll see what the trend has been for grant funding over a number of years. And where we're sitting right now, I apologize for the very small font. We also recognize that, you know, our level of Chapter 70 funding looks different than it did in the 90s. And we also have a pretty significant decline in enrollment, which is not atypical for many of the communities in Massachusetts. It is the trend that we're seeing, but it does show that we're having to look at how our schools are functioning with less students, and that makes us have to have some hard conversations, which we see at times playing out in the newspaper. We also wanted to let the committee know that there are other factors that we have to take into consideration, such as retirement assessments, our contractual obligations. On page 8, we talk about our charter school enrollment and the cost of charter schools. So while we have seen an increase over time, because we've had some local charter schools that have been geared toward our elementary students, the past 2 years I'd say are relatively stable. It's not a huge hike up, but the increase in cost because of this change in the formula, the effect on the system is significant. So in the meantime, we have a lot of changes in federal and state mandates, which are actually, in many cases, good things. People don't like to think that they're good things, but many of them are. But while we're trying to change and grow and become better at our work, often these mandates are underfunded or unfunded. So we know that we're sitting in a scale that tips in a direction that we are not happy with. And then I talked a little bit about how we consider addressing the gap. I think the next, if we could just go to the next packet, I can kind of take us to how we addressed where we were. Can skip the first few pages because I'm reorienting them. So on page 3, you can see how we started the conversation about closing the gap. Again, we're looking at specific student needs, we're looking at efficiencies, we're looking at our enrollments, and our demographic information and our achievement performance of individuals as well as groups of students. We then really looked at, again, reviewed mission, vision, the guidance that was provided by the school committee, and is really asking questions. What are our priorities within the roadmap that we created, our district improvement plan? And then on page 4, we talk about keeping kids in the forefront of all of our decision making. And we asked ourselves some specific questions, which goes to some of the questions that were raised tonight. Where are the declining enrollments represented? Those are a question we start to ask ourselves before we start to make reductions. If we're going to reduce something or add something, is it consistent with our district improvement plan? There was lots of conversation this year about what amount of staffing is actually needed to schedule a building. So what FTE is necessary. And then we talked a lot about instructional time, time on learning, per pupil costs, and how do we create an educational program that supports our priorities and where it helps kids to really spend time and learn deeply about topics versus kind of general coverage. And we looked at thankfully, our enrollments for next year, and we were able to reduce one classroom teacher based on, we have less students, one larger group of 6th grade going out, so we reduce a classroom, and we're still able to stay within the guidelines of class sizes set by the, recommended by the school committee. So our class sizes really are beautiful. We will continue to use choice to fill in, and that means just to really either bring class sizes up a little bit in some cases, such as in grade 3, you'll see across the board, and in other cases to kind of make the class sizes equitable across buildings. So, and we have a lively, actually a very healthy number of families who are already asking to come into our system at this moment. I think we have around 20 students before we even advertise for choice. So I think we will be able to fill in where carefully we're able to. We also met the reductions by, this is the question of FTE, what's necessary to actually schedule schools, and we were able to reduce 0.5 of art, 0.4 of music, and 0.3 of phys ed. That maintains the same amount of instructional time for students in all of those areas, so we are not cutting the experience of our kids. We just can have less because we have less sections in a school. It maintains some flex time for teachers, those teachers to integrate into the life of the school and be involved with musicals and such. We also, and that gives a little bit of information, more detailed information if you're interested in that. We did reduce the world language program that we implemented a few years ago on the specials rotation because quite honestly the cost benefit was not there. We were not seeing that this model would be improving, would be more of an exposure than it would be about providing students the opportunity to move into middle school with a higher, into a higher level of language development. And we're going to be offering world languages in our after-school program. So we were able to find a middle ground there. Additionally, we cut educational team leaders, a clerical administrative support position, an English language arts curriculum leader, and a portion of an administrator, which the other portion is realized in the regional schools. It's an 80-20 position, region Amherst. Also a guidance counselor, a tiny bit of intervention, 10%, and paraprofessionals across various program areas. The only additions were a small amount, I think it's $6,000 for increasing a person's position, which would allow us to have an elementary registrar, which would allow us to be able to have all students registered centrally, which will clean up our data, which is very hard to keep clean if you have it entered in multiple locations. And it's critically important that we have clean data because much of our funding comes based on that data being clean. Also, we're able to have someone who's bilingual so that the initial welcoming to our schools is welcoming. And we also, the only other addition is a Steps to Success liaison, which is consistent with our priority for having a systemic approach to family engagement. Because as of right now, in particular, we have 40% of our students who are income eligible at the elementary level, and we have not fully done a great job of being able to really connect with families who, for one reason or another, are not being really connected to our schools. So we need to really think about how to do that in a more systemic way. So we have added one person to the elementary, it's a teacher level position at the elementary level, one at the secondary level, and we're going to be creating a program based on Brookline Public Schools, and it's a program called Steps to Success, where it's based on some of the work by Dr. Karen Mapp, where the research is around when you're actually having parents partner with the schools around specifically the achievement of their children, the performance of kids dramatically increases if you're able to put specific interventions in place. So we are going to be trying to make that happen because we still are not fully, I think, supporting students and families at the level that will really help us to move our performance of populations of students forward. So with this and some other reductions, which you see in Rob's packet, there was a page that showed some other prepayments of retirement incentives and some other things that we can make real this year. We've reached our cap, and while it's not easy and it's not comfortable for staff or for many people, I'm comfortable with these reductions and that we are able to meet the plan that helps us move along our way toward meeting the mission of our schools. So while tough, we're okay.
Since a lot of the questions have been around reductions in quote specials.
Yes.
When I look at page 5, and you have the classroom sizes in that, then you look at the reductions underneath. Have any classrooms sections been eliminated so that by reducing the amount of time these people spend in the system, that they are still covering all the classes? In other words, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, so you've cut these, but if you have the same number of classes, that means that they're getting less.
Yeah.
But if I can show that some of the sections in the classrooms have been reduced, then it remains the same.
And if you look historically, and I don't have the exact years, but a handful of years ago, Wildwood and Fort River were up to 24 or 25 classrooms. With around the same FTE, they may have had a 0.2 more, 1.27 classrooms in one. But there were some barriers to being able to make reductions for scheduling, because quite honestly, these reductions could have been made based on the number of sections a few years ago. But the Wednesday schedule was such that at that time, there were decisions made that Wednesdays there would not be specials. So we had people there 5 days a week providing direct service to classrooms, 4 of the 5. So at that point, if we had made reductions to staff, they would be cut on Wednesday, which means there was no possibility of them picking up another 0.2 from another school to make them whole. So we would have been committed to reducing all of our specialists to a 0.8 position. And so at that time, a number of years ago, that was not something that the system wanted to take on. So with our going to 5 days per week, you can do that. We have a few retirements, which helps us as well to keep most people hold in a 1.0 teaching job. However, they may work across two buildings, which is very typical in schools. Rarely do they have a 1.0, one person full-time for a school building. So there were some reasons why that wasn't reduced earlier when it could have been, in my opinion, comfortably. However, thinking about the human beings attached to those positions was really, was valued and is valued. So the decision was made when we could. And the numbers of sections, if you go and do some of the math now, if you have 20 classrooms and you look at a 5-day schedule or 4-day schedule depending on the percentages, it allows people to have their individual prep time, 40 minutes daily, the lunch period, 40 minutes daily, the before school time, after school time isn't scheduled, which is about right now a half hour, could be 40 minutes next year, and we still were able to maintain 3 or 4 sections of non-scheduled 40-minute blocks over the course of the week to do things like art installations, musicals and such. So we balanced it. Could we have gone to lower or greater? We could, no, but we could, I'm not hearing you ask that. We could have, but we tried to find the balance. Does that make sense? That was kind of a long-winded answer for.
Right, but I think that's an answer question you're gonna probably ask at town meeting.
Absolutely.
So you may want to
Yes.
get it in a.
I will try to get it succinct.
Well,
And I
and
can also
also
data
real
around that.
clear, because that came up again and again at your meetings.
Exactly.
And I think it'll be brought up again.
Right.
It's in
And
the
I-
paper.
Absolutely, and I know I've said this before, and people don't appreciate when I say this, but I think if you're asking me to be fiscally responsible, and I have more staff than is necessary to schedule a building and to meet the expectations around integration, then I'm being fiscally irresponsible. So I would have, even if we didn't have a gap, I would still be looking to reduce those costs, because I think that's what is the right thing to do. And that's a financial perspective that not everyone appreciates. I understand that.
Okay, and then Janice.
This is a dumb question, I think,
No such thing.
page, oh yes,
Teachers say.
page 7.
And Rob's,
Rob, this is
Yes.
Rob.
Mm-hmm.
You said the FY14 budget, you said that was a level services budget.
Yep,
Before the cuts.
Before the cuts, right?
right, yes.
So,
Well,
yeah, this is not a dumb question, I know where you're going.
so where is the budget that the school committee approved?
the budget the school committee approved is this budget at the level of 21 million.
Nine,
999.
199.
Okay, but the breakdown is gonna be different. Yes, because we're gonna have to, now that it's been passed, go back, take these adds and cuts, and adjustments, and move them up Put
into
them in
the
the
lines that are
yes.
affected by it.
So
Yes.
I also think sometimes, I didn't go over this, and I don't know if that makes,
I didn't want to interrupt you because
No,
you're
no,
doing
no.
a beautiful narrative.
Well, I
And I was saying, page 11 shows you the numbers attached
yeah,
to
if you
those.
look at page 11, when we look at level services, when we know that there are things like relicensing, dues, those sorts of things that are automatically going up, we include that as a level services, because to maintain what we have now, there's an increased cost. So, and then some of those, when there are mandated costs for health or special education, when we may have students who need monitors on a van, and they have monitors now, so we know that that cost is gonna be most likely, I consider that level services. So for us, that is added, so the 84,000 is an add, plus what I consider adds are the 2 middle items, and then we're reducing, so we're actually making a reduction of $804,000. Does that?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
I think I understand that. I'm
Okay.
thinking more in terms of presentation, because this does not look like any other budget that we deal with. It's been pre-reduced by the time we're
Oh.
looking at it.
Uh-huh.
So, at some point, you're going to have an FY14 budget that shows what the FY14 numbers are compared to the FY13 numbers,
Yeah,
and the difference between them.
that's right.
Okay, because I think that's much easier for people to understand.
Mhm.
No, you've just been deep in this for the last, what, how many, 25 months. But when you talk about cuts, in some cases it's a reduction from a level services budget rather than from last year's budget. So,
Yeah.
And that's been an ongoing conversation we've been having, yes.
Yeah, it's what tells the better story, you tell a story different ways. We could distribute it all up and say, well, gee, we increased the budget $400,000, but that then ignores the fact that we are reducing all of these positions and adjusting the programs and so forth. So you can still have that story, but what's the best departure point for telling the story, or like bringing that to awareness?
right, which is part of our job too.
Yes, right.
And we try, when we do our written report at town meeting, we try to be consistent
Mm-hmm.
in the way we tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to look at the recommended school budget
Mm-hmm.
and how it compares with last year's budget.
Mm-hmm.
And the details to be filled in if requested by you or the school committee. So for us, it's the bottom line, really.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple thoughts about that actually. That was on my notes to bring that up too. So I recognize, Janice, that you've had your hand up, and I will get back to you in a second. But one is that I think that what the question may be is to whether FY14 budget should be FY14 preliminary budget, and then there should be an additional column that is FY14 adopted budget that has all of the numbers that actually are adopted.
Mm-hmm.
No, you disagree, Kay, so speak up. Explain.
We didn't do that with any other budget.
Right.
And I think we should acknowledge how hard the superintendent and the school committee have worked to get this budget to where it is. But I think in the presentation of the budget, what matters to us as a finance committee is what this budget is compared to what last year's budget was. If we talk about, we can fill in a larger explanation of how it was difficult to get there, now they get there, now this is less than what they would providing the same services last year, but counterbalancing that is that there are fewer kids. So I think that's the real story.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think we're probably missing each other. We're not connecting on what we're thinking
The
here.
preliminary budget, I think that doesn't belong in there.
It may not belong in there, but if it's going to be there, because it is, that's so much of a step in the process that the schools go through. If they create it and want to show it, I think that they have a right to show it. But what I think that's really a question that you and I are both getting into is that in the final, the FY14 budget, if there's a column to the left, it doesn't matter. It needs to be the actual budget that's adopted, and the difference needs to be the actual difference from the prior year.
Yeah.
And I think that's where
But
we're probably seeing it the same, not
we haven't,
different.
except, I don't think in our previous reports, we've had preliminary FY13 budget and
No, we don't.
recommended.
No, we don't.
And we
don't.
have this sheet.
That's what I
This
think we
is,
shouldn't do.
and I think we should do what we've done in the past, otherwise we're gonna confuse people, bring their books. This is what they do. I say it, they say it, that the bottom line is what we voted, and that any of these lines may change depending on circumstances, that they are not cast in any kind of concrete.
Not voting.
So we're not, they're not voting it, but the school committee doesn't vote it. They vote the bottom line, and we know that there's movement in all of these, so to try to say an exact dollar isn't going to work, because it may not be. So I think I'd like us to look at the previous reports and kind of go along with that. That seems to be understandable to people.
Then, you two aren't agreeing either, but I want to get to Rob and Janice.
Okay, so what we do internally, of course, is we take those adjustments and put them into the lines where they belong. And so we can distribute to the directors and so forth, the principals, what their budget is for the year. And so we get to a place where you're talking about that. And we typically do that in June, July, and distribute it internally.
This comes and goes between.
Now, could we do that sooner and get a copy of that version out to you? Sure, we could do that, if that's your preference.
But
But
people
then,
have to know it's gonna change.
I would also,
Yeah.
you know, think Mary Lou's
Still say that, it changes.
thought
when you-
seriously is like, you're gonna do change the format. Entirely up to you, it's your presentation, but
The library
you could do
budget
either way.
is similar. We vote the bottom line, but it appears, you know, broken down into things but they can change that around anytime they want.
Yes, Sandy?
So last year, when you presented a budget that finance committee had and town meeting had, was this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it was a sort of best guess of,
Yeah.
and then there was a bottom line adjustment number.
Yes.
And you didn't do that rehashing, mixing and matching until after town meeting.
Right,
And that's been your pattern year after year.
that's been our practice.
It's
Yeah.
also helpful because we're doing
You
a
don't have to be
lot
stuck in the past,
No,
excuse me.
no, but we do a
Well,
lot
and-
of hiring and we do a lot of changes, so what we would publish now is not gonna be anywhere near what it's gonna look like necessarily in July, but if, depending on what your purpose is for it, we could do that.
I guess my only point is a budget is more than numbers. That the dollar figures that go in this far right-hand column are gonna change. The bottom line and what town meeting has to vote is this bottom line. And then there's a story about the changes
Right.
that you've done that's really the important thing to talk about. So I would advise not to get too caught up in the details of the numbers, because stay with this, and then finance can talk about the bottom line, and the town meeting, the superintendent's gonna talk about the impact on services, and that's where the discussion, I would think, should be.
Okay.
Just that when we get the chart that goes in to the finance committee report, I, who have seen this is my 9th school committee budget, got confused when I was looking at this. So if the line that says FY14 budget could be your best guess at this point for those numbers. You see what I mean? I mean, you have over here how what the changes will be, what the adjustments will be to these numbers, which is level services. So maybe you could just make those changes and call it the FY14 budget.
But that's where Mary Lou and you are,
No,
No.
these won't be sufficient, it's incorporating this number into these that they would have
Right,
to do.
and
That
I
would
think
be
the meeting understands that. I mean, we were pretty clear when we explained this budget. And no one questions, what does that 656,000, what does that mean? Means that, you know, from above, we have reduced it by that. And we wound up with a budget of 21 million something. So I don't,
wish I had a report from last year.
I think you will see that that's the sheet we put in
I
there.
think that is the sheet that was
That's
in
a
for
sheet we
prior
put in for
years.
5 years now,
Yeah,
that I've been on this.
we can come back to that if you get a chance to look at it, but I do agree with you that it is consistent.
You've been consistent.
And, you know, the question that we're sort of getting into the second level of question is, what we've been doing consistently, is it the best and most understandable presentation, or is there, making a change will always be a change in the first year it's made, but then people will get used to it if you're consistent going forward. What Sandy is suggesting is that, since it is consistent and it's unnecessary to make the change because people are used to seeing it, I can see the only reason to do it is make it more consistent with the town manager budget pages. And that may be just not something that is expected or doable.
But Andy, they're not the same.
Yeah, they're very different.
They're
budgets.
very different.
I
Just look
know.
at the town report. So trying to make this consistent with the town isn't going to happen because you have all the departments with all their little charts. This isn't like that.
We're not voting those little lines in the chart, we're voting the bottom line.
Well, that's here.
It's sort of like a big department.
Yeah, it's one big department, all these pieces.
I think though it's, all the information is presented, it's just presented differently. And so the debate that's been going on is that okay? Because you're telling what the changes are for the next year, it's just that they're being done as additions and deletions, as opposed to being built into the budget itself. The other comment that I had, and then I want to get to Janice, is that I know you've done this consistently year after year after year, and I just want to make an observation, not ask you to change it. But by calling that line on page 7, the level services total, and then to come in later and say, but because of falling enrollment and smarter planning, we really are presenting you a budget of $21,989,199 that is really level services because we're making these adjustments that we're achieving by adjusting for enrollment deductions and smarter management. Creates confusion about what that level services total is, and it may be that there's a jargon change to consider for future years, like continuation budget or something like that, to imply continuation of all current positions and programs, so that it doesn't get tied up into a confusion with the term level services.
Right. And it's honestly, and even when we realize the reductions and the additions, it's a bit of both. I mean, there are some things that, if there were a different financial time, I might choose to change or add, and there are some things that I'd say, ooh, maybe I'd prefer not to, but the majority of the reductions are enrollment related. You know, so I don't, but I agree that language, you know, change
That's an
can.
improvement.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that can work.
Janice?
Well, I was just making a comment related to this discussion, and then I'll ask my original
Okay.
question. I do think there is confusion, and I kind of like to see the changes, the reductions or whatever in the line, and then the one bottom number. But I think you can have like another page with the addition, you know, sort of explain the changes without it being actually, you know, caught up in the budget and the part itself.
Right.
And my original question was, in next steps, in this one, you talk about greater differentiation in mathematics.
Yes.
So could you explain that a little
I'd be
bit? I
happy
know
to.
there's been a lot of up and down in mathematics over the years. And
Yeah, mathematics has
kids
been
are
a
in
big
school.
topic. Yeah, what we've really been focusing on, one of the many things, is really looking at our curricular alignment. So what are we using for materials in all of our classrooms, so some level of consistency, as well as so horizontally and vertically. So we're doing a substantial amount of work right now, which at the elementary level, with purchasing a new math curriculum, which we have everyday math that just started this year. What we see in the area of mathematics in particular, we have some students who struggle, some students who do fairly well, and some kids who are really taking off. So it requires a greater level of differentiation at content area. So part of what our work has been this year at the elementary level is to think about what is our philosophy around how that differentiation happens, and then to be able to train teachers to be able to actually comfortably do that in the classroom. The materials that we purchased this year has, one of the reasons for purchasing that program was because it actually has some natural extensions or enrichment and some ways to really enhance or to target intervention for kids who are struggling. So that's within the curriculum itself, and the development of our teachers to be able to do that well is some ongoing work with our math coaches. So we've had coaches for the past 2 years who are going in and working with teachers to model how to make that happen, to sit and help them grapple with, what's happening in the classrooms. So that's at the elementary level. The secondary level, we're in the process right now. We will be having an update on looking at our pathways. What happens at the middle school level? Do we take a test or not take a test going into middle school? That is all being examined and potentially adjusted in the very near future, as well as when kids go into our high school, because of kids that come from all over the place, and we've kind of done this more is better thing. We've had, I think, 13 or 14 different options for 9th grade in the high school, and we are now looking at how do you look at not only in terms of resources, but in terms of best practice of what should the math pathway or pathways look like at the high school level. Very large conversations, but it does require not only a lot of looking at the Common Core standards and aligning coursework to those standards, but also to talk with and work with the adults to learn to modify, differentiate for the various learners you have in your classroom. And it is not easy, but it is what it takes to actually do this well with the population of kids we have sitting in front of us. So our curriculum director, Director of Teaching and Learning, Dr. Rhonda Cohen, is exceptional, and she is has, I think it's her PhDs in mathematics. I want to say it is. She's a math person who worked with Deborah Ball at the University of Michigan, and our K through 8 math science person is also a PhD, and it's focused around math. So we have the perfect math minds leading this work with our teachers. So we're at like a really great place to be able to actually not only have good curriculum and materials and course sequencing, but also to work with teachers to be able to meet the various learners. And it's not hard content.
Come in and figure out this problem.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, put Rhonda in this room and she has it down, I'll tell you right now. The way her mind works and the rate at which her mind works is down.
Rate in dollars
Oh,
or rate?
no, a little bit of both. She's exceptional, and Dr. Stick as well. So I hope that helps. It's lots of work going on.
Interact.
I have to ask you 2 related questions. So first I'm going to get you back to page 7 here.
Yep.
I know you have beaten these numbers to death because you've been kind of working with these all along. And there are a couple of things kind of jump out at me, so I just want to kind of share with you and ask your opinion about that. One issue is, it's all very tight. There doesn't seem to be very much room. I don't know where you're going to cut those $656,000, but it looks like you are going to do that. Mm-hmm. But there were a couple of line items which have, if you don't look at year to year, but you look at over since 2009, some line items have been kind of exploding. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, special ed in expense account, 171 to 375, that's about 15-16% a year growth. Other program from 210 to 868, which is quadruple growth. Yep. So even though they are relatively small amounts compared to some other big items, the growth rate is pretty explosive in those.
Absolutely.
Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Other programs right off the bat is your charter school enrollment.
Okay.
So the charter school opened about that time, and they've been adding grade or 2 every year, and so that's been going steadily up.
Do you expect it to keep on going up at that rate?
No, it'll even off in about a year, because they now have all of their grades in place and full, so now it should be stabilized in the Amherst budget. However, they're now adding grades through 12, so it'll start ramping up in the regional budget.
And the formula itself, though, even though the enrollment won't necessarily keep increasing, the aid formula.
Yeah, the aid formula's changed, and I think I included it in this packet here. Yeah, it's on page 59. Is how they changed the reimbursement rate, and it will slow the reimbursement rate, so the net cost is going to be higher than it would have been for the next 3 or 4 years. But in itself, it's not going to be explosive. It's just going to be running at a higher rate than it otherwise would have.
Okay. So same thing with special ed and.
I can do special ed. So in terms of special education, while we're seeing a decline in enrollment for our general population of students, we're not seeing a decline in the number of special education students. So, and the level of need of students has changed dramatically over the past, 10 to 20 years, because for many, many reasons, I'm not the scientist to talk about genetics and such, but also many students who are very medically fragile, who are living at this point were not 10 years ago. I mean, medical science is really, so the level of need of children is very different. And so the cost associated with meeting the needs of students has increased as well. And thankfully, many of those students are very well supported in our schools, which does reduce costs than out-of-district placements. Trying to think, I was going to tell you one other thing that slipped my mind about special education. So the cost is increasing, placements increase incrementally. We don't have a lot of control over that. And it's just a high need population.
Do you see it going about 15% a year?
It's difficult to tell. I could look at what at the state level. I think we're not an anomaly at the state level. So my guess is that I would say, I don't know if it's going to be 15%, but I do not see it decreasing. And the cost for specialists and specialized services have been increasing. So I would think that trajectory continues.
Sure. And the program staff development, 160 to 247 over a couple of years. I mean, that's not as rapid a growth, but still, this is much higher than 2% that you can get.
I would look at some of that because I do remember the other thing I was going to say. It's related to special education, but also this. I would have to be able to answer that, look at the grants, because previously a lot of these supports for staff development as well as for special education were supported through grant funding. So I would wonder, and I would have to go back and look at this for you, what's shifted off of grants onto appropriations. Also, if we look at development of our staff and needs, I would be personally, over the past maybe year and a half, we've increased resources going to that area because the level of change that we're requiring of our teachers to stay current with the changes that we're seeing come to us from the state and federal government. And again, funds don't follow. So whenever we put new standards in place, we have to provide training for staff to be able to make that real. So I don't see necessarily those costs decreasing either, not in the short term.
Okay. So let me just follow up on those.
Please.
So this budget seems really tight in the sense that all of these things are well justified. I mean, they are necessary for running our school operation. So there is no give. Not very much give. I mean, whatever the give there is, you are taking away because you have to. So basically, the model itself, this model of education itself, is just creating these pressures which are built into the model. It's a resource intensive model, and these costs are well justified in this model.
Yes.
So is there any conversation about really rethinking the model itself so that it kind of just opens up a lot more headroom?
Yes.
Otherwise, this is going to be from now until the end of time. We'll be just limping along every year and just squeezing here and cutting there.
Exactly.
And then we can only do so much before the quality of the overall enterprise begins to deteriorate.
Yes. So what we've been doing over this past year in particular is really looking at service delivery models, schedule, use of time, and any of those decisions have effect on the amount of staff that you need and therefore the associated costs. So the cuts this year were made with not only the short-term kind of vision in the lens and the longer-term perspective. So while so for instance, the development, once we become more expert in delivering services or having interventions that work for kids, there are corresponding reductions that could occur. I would suggest, not that everyone does appreciate hearing this, but we've had a system where, for a number of years, we've had a change in demographic, a change in need in our population of students, and we hadn't necessarily put the structures in place to actually address those needs, such as like a tiered instructional model where you use data to inform instruction, you target. So what we did over time is, as more needs came in, we added people in some cases versus addressing the system perspective. So what we're doing now is building those systems and those structures to actually meet the needs of all of our kids, which has a potential of corresponding reductions. And also some of the programmatic model shifts. You know, there are some discussions right now around professional staff, paraprofessional staff. How do you teach together so that you are reducing the number of necessarily people, and it's a much stronger service delivery model for kids. Also, depending on what schedules you put in place, it makes a difference in staffing levels, and it's a priority to be able to look at what schedule makes the most sense for children, and sometimes that does affect adults. Also, over time, there's been a lot, I won't say a lot, but there's been some level of accommodation of, you know, part-time people versus full-time people, and if you think about the costs associated with having multiple part-time people who may have benefits, if you look to consolidate to full-time, you reap some secondary benefit through bringing down the costs of insurance. So there's multiple layers to be able to look at the long-range planning to be able to become more sustainable within the new fiscal reality, as I'm saying. And we've been really conscious about having that perspective at the systems level, and we need to go to the place of, so we're having a decline in enrollment, what is our programmatic picture going to look like so that we are still really exciting for kids and we're engaging kids and we don't have kids exiting to other programs, and what is core. So there's a lot of conversations right now that we're really beginning to have over the next year or so to think about our commitments programmatically and our use of facilities. I mean, there's lots of different layers of.
So are those marginal changes, or are they kind of fundamentally different fundamentally structural changes?
They're fundamental I'd say structural changes. They're large changes. It takes a bit of time to realize the financial benefit and the educational benefits for children, but I would say the changes that we're making slowly over time are helping us to decrease our costs so that I'd say the cuts that we realized last year, the year before, those cuts were much more in the moment reactionary, oh my God, we have a gap. This year it was much more strategic and thoughtful about how these reductions now are positioning us in the future. So does that?
Okay, it does. I mean, obviously, you're obviously having a lot of conversations amongst yourselves about that.
Right.
So it's just, an awareness for us, because
Sure.
the numbers by themselves, as we've had the discussion before, don't really tell you the whole story about all this stuff which really is going on.
Absolutely.
But those numbers, all those efforts you're making will show up in these numbers eventually.
Absolutely.
And the question is, will they show up at like a 1%, 2% savings,
Right.
or at some point it'll show up as a wham, 20% change?
Wouldn't that be nice?
And
I think it's slow and steady. If I were going to anticipate, first of all, it's going to be slow and steady because the level of change that you requires of a system to realize any savings or to at least mitigate the reductions are massive. So how much can an organization change and at what rate before you tip it over the edge? So around morale and changes in asking people to do their work differently. It is a slow, steady process, but it's in a very strategic process. So I wouldn't think that we're going to see like 20%, but I would love to see enough where we're actually starting to make some headway.
Because there's a lot of conversation, just one last thing, there's a lot of conversation in the media, which I'm sure you're ahead of everybody else in those conversations, about the impact that these technologies are having on the educational model in general. Like, places like Khan Academy, of course they cannot deliver the needs that are present among our student populations. They are not capable of doing that. But there are a lot of conversations out there about how the technologies are fundamentally changing how the education is delivered. So I was just kind of trying to get a sense of that.
Yeah, it's important to stay current and think forward.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add one thing, because I think you've raised an important question. The additional thing is that I think Regional School District Planning Board is convinced that regionalizing with even 2 other towns will create efficiencies that aren't going to affect the model, because it allows for sharing of students and sharing of resources over a larger number of schools and a larger number of students. And so that whole regionalization discussion has, is partly driven in the thinking of the board by trying to address this very issue that you're talking about how towns can collectively address a problem without affecting the core values of the program that underlies, which is then going to be my concluding comment, and then I'm going to go around the room to see if there are any other questions. Otherwise, we, I think, need to move along. If the voters are presented with a proposal, as we expect in the fall, and it is approved in sufficient number of towns to create a region, our whole presentation next year is going to be real different. And so any attempt to think about making suggestions, as I did on one point about changes for next year, I suddenly realized after I said that wait a minute, this may be totally irrelevant to next year. And so I think that once the voters have spoken, we may want to then have a follow-up meeting before we get too far into the budget process to get a better understanding, if it is adopted, as to what this is going to mean for us, because we're going to be looking at something a lot closer to what we're looking at now for the 7 to 12 schools. Going around the room, other questions on the elementary budget that haven't been covered already? If not,
so just to confirm, after the discussion about the presentation of page 7.
He's taking us back there.
I keep box of that. Is it your pleasure that we just keep it the same format, the way it's page 7 that we've been presented the last number of years, knowing that
I'm getting a nod from Kay, and my thinking is this. It goes along with the discussion that we just had. We've been consistent for a number of years. If there's a desire to change the budget because it doesn't make sense, we should do it because the voters have said no to regionalization, and we need to improve the budget presentation a year from now. But to make a change in what could be the last year of the presentation of the budgets doesn't make a lot of sense. It'd probably be easier for Mary Lou in making the presentation to just be consistent with prior years. Is that correct?
Right, and I'll be working with them. I think there's one thing that you made that we can clean up, but I think we'll be fine.
Thank you. Just want to come to closure on that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we're happy to take, again, Mary Lou knows, and Andy prior to, we're happy to take suggestions about materials to bring to town meeting and content for my presentation or anyone else's, so happy to do that. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It was a lot of time, but we really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Sorry to keep you waiting, Guilford.
So, Guilford is going to talk, is here because we need to get into item B, which is non-financial and petition articles. However, non-financial is really non-budget. We're looking for whether there are financial consequences for non-budget items. And I think he will tell us the ones that he is prepared to address, though I think that a lot of them have to do with easements, and so I'll let you go and talk about the warrant articles that you're prepared to talk about tonight.
All right. I think my numbers are different than your numbers, or maybe we don't have numbers.
Gilbert, why don't you start with the water and sewer debt, which I think on the original list was number 16.
Okay. The water and sewer debt is, we made a decision about what to do with Pine Street. The decision is that we're going to get started with the utility upgrades and do the utility upgrades beginning July 1st. To do that, we need to authorize $1 million from the water enterprise system and $1 million from the sewer enterprise system for those upgrades. And that money is specifically for the Pine Street water and sewer, we call it water and sewer upgrades.
So just to be clear, we will at this town meeting authorize the debt, we will sell the debt next March, a year from now. And so the first time it will have a budget impact will be on the FY15 water and sewer budgets. Yeah, thinking ahead on this, when we were looking at rates and so forth, we recommended the select board this last winter. We had already put that $1 million in the long-term rate structure. So, and kind of feathered it in with existing debt that's being paid off and so forth. So there won't be any change to the water and sewer budgets that were presented to you. It's just getting the authorization so we can sell it.
And of course, this is because we've applied for a grant for several years, and each year we have not received the grant, and we can't move forward with Pine Street unless we take care of what's under Pine Street first.
Correct.
What's under Pine Street?
Okay.
Pipes.
Heights.
Pipes. Water and sewer.
Yeah, Kay, you had your hand up, or do you have something?
I move that we recommend this article.
I second it.
Maybe premature, but it seems like something that
It's gotta be done.
it's gotta be done. And if Guilford and other people in this building think this is the time to do it and borrow for it, I think we should do it.
We're ready to go. We've got the design done. We'll be, when town meeting is officially approved on July 1st or 5 days after the end of the town meeting, we'll be ready to start construction. So now's the time to go, and the money people say we can go.
The select board had an opportunity to talk about it yet.
I don't think, you haven't presented to the select board yet, have you?
No, you're the first committee to get these, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem with doing the vote now is that is it appropriate, or can you phrase the motion to do a vote before the select board signs a warrant? In other words, something like, if this is offered, then it is the position of the finance committee to support it.
Oh, if it's on the warrant.
Correct.
Yes, if it's on the warrant, that's, yes. That's
Conditional.
my motion.
Okay, so the motion will reflect that we recognize that this is contingent upon the select board making the decision to put this on the warrant when it signs the warrant. And so with that motion made and seconded, has been seconded already, I see if there's discussion.
It's good that you can make it conditional, thank you.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, I think everybody knows what this is about. All in favor indicate by raising hands. Okay, so it's 7-0. I don't need to ask for anything else since there were 7 votes. All right, Sandy, you want to guide us along as you did? That was helpful.
Yeah, very good. So then we are getting into a number of easements and so forth. The first one that I have on my list is number 21. In any case, it is labeled the sewer easement for Harkness Road. And then right after that is the sewer easement for Amherst Woods. I think it's the same issue. So I need to
It's the same issue. So, fall town meeting over a year ago, we were authorized to do a sewer extension on Harkness Road, Amherst Woods. We're finishing up the plans on both those projects. They'll go out to bid this year as well. We do need a pump station on Harkness Road, and we do need a pump station in Amherst Woods. This article will allow us to take land for, as in easements, take land as easements, to site the pump stations for both these projects. The article in Amherst Woods may go away. We are definitely have to have a pump station on Harkness Road, and the property owner has already agreed to the easement and has agreed to the charge for the easement, which is nothing.
We don't have to pay for the easement.
Oh, he's got,
But you're not taking it by eminent domain?
no, he's gonna grant us the easement as a gift.
Right,
Okay.
agreement.
And the Amherst Woods, which is the one that's at this point uncertain whether you're going forward with or not. We don't, do you know the answer as to whether there'll be a financial impact?
We do not believe so. The place the sewer easement needs to be is on the Amherst Woods Association property, so we feel they'll grant us an easement too for the betterment of their community.
Okay, to let the committee know what my suggestion was, because Sandy and I talked about this earlier today. I thought it would be helpful, just for the sake of managing Guilford's time, to let him make the presentation on this and answer all your questions. And then at a later meeting, that through Sandy, report as to what is the final, what is finally happening with each of these easement requests. And that will enable us to, after Sandy's report, make a decision on these with probably just a couple minutes of discussion. So what I'd like to, if that's comfortable with the committee, to make sure that you have all of your questions asked today, that will allow then Sandy to just make that report and us act on it at the time.
And then we'll vote.
And then we would vote, because
I wasn't touching
if there's nothing, if nothing happens on the Amherst Woods one, then we probably don't want to have taken a vote on something that isn't going to happen. I think that's sort of the way I was looking at it.
Congress does it all the time.
Without reading it. Just a couple of questions. In Harkness Road, it's a property owner that we're
Yes.
talking about. And Amherst Woods, both of those are on, what did you say, property?
It's a homeowners association property.
Okay, and both are on homeowner
There's
association?
only one.
There's a mistake on the list. It looks like there's a sewer easement for Amherst Woods and an easement for Amherst Woods, but that second one is redundant.
Okay, so 23 take out?
Mm-hmm.
Alright. Alright, and what about the Pine Street one?
We haven't gotten
Well, we
there yet.
haven't gotten there yet.
They're jumping the gun.
Oh, I was
I
going
want
to
to make sure that everybody is comfortable with where we are with Harkness Road and Amherst Woods, and because those were authorized, as previously noted, by bonds that have already been issued and authorized by a prior town meeting. All costs related with the project have therefore been committed, and the financial consequences for it have been largely built into the prior discussion that happened at that time. So, is there anything you wanted to add, Sandy?
No, I think we could now move on to Pine Street if people don't have questions about these other two.
After talking to Sandy today, I realized that Pine Street definitely will probably be dropped this time, so you should just draw a line through Pine Street.
Is that related to the authorization of the bonds that are tied to the prior article you talked about?
No. There's two parts to Pine Street. There's the utility work, and then there's the upgrading the road. Upgrading the roadway, people want bike lanes, sidewalks, and all this other stuff. If we actually do a full-blown upgrade where we do bike lanes and sidewalks, there's a few properties along the way where the road gets very narrow, and we'll have to ask for easements or take right away from those properties, and that's what this article was for. And the actual road design changes have not been decided on and approved yet, so it's probably it's very much premature to be talking about it now. It'll probably come at fall town meeting if it comes at all.
Okay. So then we should go on to Southeast Street?
Southeast Street is a community development block grant project that has been submitted. We do not know if we have it or not. If we do the project, we will put a sidewalk from Colonial Village Apartments on Southeast Street to the Cumberland Farms on Southeast Street. This is the one section where there's a lot of foot traffic and there is no sidewalk. We would need easements from the Colonial Village apartment complex and then 2 property owners in between Colonial Village and Cumberland Farms. And that's what this easement would be allowed for us to get an easement from them.
Like 25.
And so this is not definite yet, or it is definitely coming forward?
It's been submitted as a community development block grant project,
Right.
and it'll actually be approved sometime between now and probably the start of town meeting. Or it'll be rejected between now and the start of town meeting. It should be positive. It should be approved, it'll be approved.
And do any of the property owners expect payment for the easements as far as we know, or is that?
No, they do not. The apartment complex, we've talked to them briefly, they're excited about getting the sidewalk. The 2 property owners we're talking to, one of them is already developing or has plans to develop this property, so we'd actually be putting in the sidewalk that he would be putting in. So, and the 3rd property owner doesn't really matter which way it goes.
Questions? Yes, James?
So if we don't get the grant, then it won't proceed?
Correct.
So are you going to be asking for, I mean, will we know about the grant before town meeting?
Yes, we're supposed to.
As we know, you never know with grants, so we're hoping.
And will we know before we have to issue our written report to town meeting?
I do not know the answer to that.
So I think the question is, do we want to take a position that is, states that if the grant is received and this is applied for, we think it is something that to support, or do we want to defer to town meeting?
We've done that before. Yeah, we could defer.
Yeah.
And we've also taken positions only if the money was available.
Right.
Okay. So the suggestion is to defer to town meeting. And do that, we usually do it by motion, don't we?
We don't wanna do that now, why don't we wait?
Okay, so why don't we hold that Sand Deal report to us at a later time when he's reporting on the other items, and we'll either take action or defer depending upon what we've heard. How's that?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Then,
Electrical easement on North
yeah,
Pleasant Street. The, down by the funeral home and Starbucks and across the street at the Super Bowl Food for Thought. That block has a power outage issue because there's an underground transformer vault, and every once in a while it gets wet and the transformer's short and everybody in that area loses power and it gets to be a problem. The owner of many of those properties has talked to Western Mass Electric, and has convinced them to do something about the problem. So Western Mass Electric will be coming to the town and asking for an easement to place an above ground transformer near Starbucks Walk. We call it Starbucks Walk. Everybody else calls it Boltwood Walk, Boltwood Alley. It goes between Starbucks and the funeral home, between North Pleasant Street and the parking garage. So it'll be a big black utility cabinet we have power in now, and there'll be a green transformer, above ground transformer there is what they want to put in. So the specifics haven't been worked out yet, but it will be coming and it will have to be dealt with at this annual town meeting.
so it's the easement would be from the town to the electric company, and would the electric company provide any compensation for the easement, or is the request that the town grant the easement?
The request is that we grant the easement to the electric company.
without compensation.
Correct. We work very well together. We call them up with problems. They take care of them for us. They call us up with problems. We take care of them for us. We've been working very well together, so we're trying to keep both our costs down as low as possible.
Okay. Other questions from the committee about this? Do we see this as having a financial impact?
We usually take a position though, because when we did the easements through the parking lot, for lack of a better term, there, the parking garage, those got rearranged, I think it was last year, but maybe 2 years ago. We did a position on that, I believe, as well. Again, similar circumstance where once the building was built, where they needed the actual easements was different from where they had requested easements and so on and so forth. So I think this falls in the same category as that. So we do often take those for housekeeping.
It's a little different. We kind of move all over the place. Are we just going to wait till we hear more, or do you want to vote
Well,
tonight?
I'm not sure that on this one we're going to know anything more.
Okay.
Okay?
I move we take no position.
I second that.
So, Kay has made a motion, seconded by Mary Lou, to take no position. Any discussion on the motion? Kay, you wanna?
Well, it doesn't sound like it's going to cost us anything, or that we're going to get any financial advantage.
Except you could
Except-
make the case that the
You could.
businesses will be
Businesses-
more
They'll
efficient.
sell more if they've got power. The restaurants, so we get away
Yeah.
with
We get more revenue.
Yeah,
They'll be happier residents.
yeah.
Janice?
No, it's just the transformer box, or is there more to it?
My understanding, it's only a transformer box. So it's a green thing about as wide as this table and about 3 feet deep. It stands about 2.5 feet tall.
Okay,
I withdraw my motion.
okay, Kay's withdrawn the motion, so,
So what's the purpose of withdrawing?
To wait a little while.
Oh, okay. I would.
I move we recommend the motion.
okay.
I'll second his recommend.
So we have now a motion by Bob, seconded by Mary Lou to recommend. And is there anything more that you want to state other than what you've already said when you were responding?
Yep.
Any further discussion on the motion? Then we'll take a vote on the motion. All in favor indicate by raising hand. Okay, so the motion passes 7-0, and we've taken the motion to recommend
Or
The
very
article-
Easy second, you know it?
the article for the granting of electrical easement on North Pleasant Street. Eastman Lane is a public way.
So I should tell a story about this so you all understand.
Yes.
Both of them
Can you do
at
both
once.
of them at once? Yeah.
Well, let him tell the story, then I'll answer your question.
Yeah, come on, then I'm gonna hear this story.
So many years ago, maybe hundreds of years ago, 150 years ago, maybe almost 200 years ago now, the forefathers of the town thought it would be very helpful to have a road going between North Pleasant Street and East Pleasant Street in the vicinity of Eastman Lane. They laid out a public way, a county way across that area, not a town way, but a county way. The county maintained it and kept it. The university came in and built buildings in there, and the university decided in their infinite wisdom, well, I won't say that. The university decided and couldn't find where the public way was, so they assumed it was just vacant land and part of the university. So they built their road. The road is here and the public way is here. And the two cross each other several times, and in a couple places the road and the public way are actually in the same spot. But for more than half of it, the road's outside the public way. So the university found this when they were doing some master planning and realized that, you know, our road's over here and we have a public way over here, and if we want to build anything, next to our road, we can't do that because it's a public way. So they came to the town and asked the town to accept the road as a public way from the county. So the town has gone through the process of having the county discontinue the road. The county process now, the COG process, can only discontinue the road to the town. They cannot give it to the state entity or anybody else. So we've asked for the discontinuance, the county has discontinued it to us. Now we must, as a town, must go through the process of accepting it, and then we want to discontinue it to the university. There's no change in Eastman Lane, there's no change in the fact how people can drive up and down Eastman Lane. There's only this paper right-of-way which goes away and becomes part of UMass, is what happens.
And UMass has been maintaining that road?
Yes, UMass maintains it, and we've always expected them to maintain it, they always have.
And so they both plow it and do any other maintenance work that needs to be done on the road, paving or whatever?
Yes, they own all the sidewalks, they plow the sidewalks, they maintain the road, they maintain the street lights, they maintain everything on the road.
On which road?
This
On
is,
Eastman Lane.
and this is from the point of the fire station and UMass Police Station traffic light
To the roundabout.
down to the roundabout.
Yes, that's the whole extent of Eastman Lane.
And we own the traffic light, however,
We do.
and we will continue to own the traffic light because it is on Pleasant Street.
The important thing about that is that the traffic violations are UMass violations over there, not the town violations. Is that correct?
No, they're town violations.
Okay. I think I've been stopped by a UMass police person over there.
There's a whole, that's a whole story that you should ask police chief about next time we have the
Okay.
police chief here. Okay,
And get this straight. So, first, town meeting has to authorize, has to accept Eastman Lane as a public way. Because that will make the public way go where the road is.
No, that just accepts the paper layout as a town layout.
Because it's a county road now.
It's a
Oh, it's a
county
county
layout.
road.
so we're accepting
So
it
we're
from the
accepting it
county
from the
and then we're
county.
giving it away to the university.
And then we're abandoning it.
Correct.
So, all right, I got it. Okay.
And that which we are accepting and abandoning doesn't match with the actual physical street that's between it, is what I'm understanding as well, correct?
More than 50% of it doesn't match, yes.
Right.
So ultimately, there will be no public way there.
No, ultimately, there'll be no public way there, but Eastman Lane, as we know it, the paved
Right.
road we drive on, will remain there and be open to the public as it is now.
Yeah, actually I have two follow-up questions just so we all understand this and can answer any questions about it to others. North Pleasant, when it runs through the university, is it a town road or a university road?
North Pleasant from Main Street to Pine Street is a town road all the way. So even through the university, it's a town road.
So this is more equivalent to the other roads that run through the university, like going up the hills by the residence halls and things like that that are public drive across, but they're maintained by the university.
Correct. All the roads in the university are open to the public to travel on, but there is no public way attached to the pavement and the roadway. They're just roads on property the university owns.
Okay.
And that means theoretically that if university wanted to close that road off and build another Mullen Center in the middle of it, that the town would have no, the town would definitely talk about it, but the town would not be able to stop it, have no say in it.
Correct. The only good part, though, is that the police station is at one end, so they need the road to get to the campus.
Because we have a fire station up there, then they also need to have a
Yes.
fire station.
Yes, really.
I move we take no position.
Second.
So we have a motion to take no position was made by Mary Lou and seconded by Janice
Would that be on both of them?
On both of
on
them,
both 27
Yes.
and 28.
yes.
Discussion. I assume that the reasoning is that there's not a financial impact. All in favor of the motion to take no position? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Interacted,
I don't take, I agree with not taking position.
okay, so it's 7-0 then. But let's reflect that. Then the next one, I think what might be the last, is abandon excess right-of-way for Atkins Corner.
It's actually two, it's the same issue, that we have to accept right away and abandon right away.
29 and 30. Thank you.
Another short story. Once upon a time, a young man came to work here as a public works superintendent. He had hair. He laughed a lot more. And he was told, you need to build an intersection at Atkins Corner. And he said, sure, I can do that. And then 12 years later, in June, the road actually finished, and we have 2 roundabouts, which people love and actually work very well. Most of the naysayers are now, they love them. And in the process of building the 2 roundabouts, we moved the road east about 100 feet, and we had to take new right-of-way, and then we have excess right-of-way. So we went through the same process we went through with Eastman Lane, because the old West Street right-of-way is a county layout, as well as a state layout, and as well as town layouts. So the state gave us the layout way back many years ago, and then the county just gave us the layout for the county layout. And then we have new layouts we've taken from the property owners so we can move the road over. So all in one big movement, we have to accept all of these new layouts, and then we have to give away the excess property, which is where the old road used to be. The old road is going to Atkins and Hampshire College. Those are the 2 abutting property owners. So this is the final thing that the town needs to do for the Atkins Road project. And so after 12 years, we are now ready to be completely, absolutely done with talking about Atkins Corner at town meeting from my standpoint.
I have real problems with this.
Does the man still have hair?
No.
It's my understanding that A, we have no compensation that would be coming from Atkins and Hampshire College, and B, that it is the understanding that we've had with Atkins and Hampshire College that in all of the give and take of property and prior easements that this would happen and they would get it under the terms that you are proposing, so that this is completion of a project under terms previously discussed and approved through previous actions.
Yes, that's very good.
So,
Again, I move we take no position, based on what we'd already agreed to in the previous negotiations for that piece of property. For that roundabout.
except I ask you one question. Would we have a liability to these property owners if we failed to honor the promises previously made?
We do.
So
Then
we
it
are
makes
actually
sense.
gaining the removal of any litigation risk.
So there wasn't any land swap with this?
Well, this is the land swap. This is the final piece.
We got land from them for where the traffic circles are
That's what I
now.
thought.
And so we're giving them land that's not needed anymore. And that was the understanding. So if we don't do this, they would have an objection.
Okay, so actually has nothing to do with the value of the land. It has, we would be voting because of possible litigation, which is money.
Actually, it does have a value of the land. When we started the project, we added up the pieces we were taking and added up the pieces that were going to be excess. And said we give you the pieces that are excess to reduce the value of what we're taking. And that's how this all came about.
So
there's no cash, but there's value.
okay, so you had made a motion that has not been seconded, but I do
No,
want
I'm
to
not,
recognize the
I'm gonna
commitment.
withdraw it because you're talking about possible litigation.
Okay,
And I move that we recommend.
okay, Kate has moved that we recommend these two.
Second.
So Kate and Doug has seconded to recommend. Is there further discussion on this motion? Covers 2 expected articles. And I'm going to note for the record that, of course, this is all of the votes that we've taken on things where we are actually supporting something already or contingent upon the select board, including them on the warrant. And so with that contingency, we're recommending. All in favor indicate by raising hands. Okay, so it's 7-0. Is there anything else that you were thinking of seeing?
For Guilford, I think Superintendent Moran is done.
Well, thank you, Guilford, very much. And we appreciate it. And as I noted, Sandy and I have tried to work out a procedure so that you.
That's going to be, planning.
So that you don't need to come back if you just keep Sandy informed and let him know the outcome of those matters. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I had more when I came.
Okay, so the next agenda item for tonight's agenda, there may be nothing here, but I wanted to, since some of you may have started working on drafting and may have questions about presentations previously made through the municipal budget, I was going to start including this on agendas, not with the expectation that there will be something, but to give you guys the opportunity as you're writing something, if you have additional questions that you'd like to ask in follow-up to Sandy, that you have the opportunity to do so.
And I would note that some of you have been emailing me and department heads questions already, which is also fine if you are starting to write these things up.
Yeah, you can do that way too, but if you just do it during open meeting, it has to be through something on the agenda. Yes?
I must have been assigned something in my absence, and I'm ignorant of what those assignments are.
Oh, well, the minutes of the last meeting that you should have been emailed do have that included. And
All the zoning articles.
thanks to Mary Lou's efficient putting this together.
Here, boy.
Okay, so if there's nothing further on that, then we get back to the item 2 on the agenda,
So you're informed.
which is the OPEB, and I'm going to keep this moving. We've already had part of the OPEB discussion already, and I think that there were really 2 purposes for doing this. One is that Enrod raised the question very late in the meeting last time, and a lot of us were fairly exhausted, and Bob wasn't here. But so I wanted to allow it to come up when it's a little bit earlier in the evening than it did last time. And then there was secondly the question that we had raised about whether it made sense to try and get a meeting with the actuary before town meeting, or whether we felt that it could wait until after town meeting so that we could include other boards and committees, since we have the agreement with the actuary to come for one presentation. Yes?
Andy, I'm not sure, but it appears that we would have everything behind us by the 25th of April, which is the last Thursday of the month. because everything is due before that. So does that make sense? I don't know that we'd have a lot on the agenda at that point, and it might give us an evening. And the school committee, as far as I can see, I mean, there may be a Pelham meeting, but there isn't any Amherst meeting at that point. And that's, well, yeah. I think trying to do it before that, when we're trying to vote and write up our reports, and that might be a little busy.
We have one, and I don't think that we need the actuary in. Do we have his report, by the way?
Yes, we do, and I can email it to you tomorrow.
Because I think that what's most important for preliminary purposes, and I'll explain why I say this in a second, is the bottom line number as to what the revised figure is. The advantage of having all of the boards and committees here, even if we postpone it till the fall to when we have the regular 4 boards meeting as we did last time, is we have a larger captive audience of all of the people who we really want to educate about OPEB. And that we really want to move the school committee's thinking and get the library trustees' support. So to use and to have the select board support. So I guess that I'm a little bit hesitant about that, but my thinking is that we do need to have the number. We want to present it because we want to make town meeting very cognizant of the extent of this debt and what it means for us and what it means for future budgets, which was what Anurag's point was at the last meeting. And it would be important to include that both in the narrative and then by reference in response to a number of articles that you've seen that have been filed by petition that ask for additional money to be allocated above and beyond the money that has already been anticipated for spending. And plus we do have one OPEB article on there because we are going to ask to put money into OPEB as a budget amendment to the current year's budget. So having the updated number for all of those purposes is helpful, but the presentation is the question. So what do you guys think?
I see a couple of people looking at me, so I'll talk. I'm sure we could have the actuary come in the fall if we wanted. Frankly, I don't think the issues that are going to come up about putting more money into OPEB at this fall town meeting, at this annual town meeting, are really going to be dramatically affected by the number, because it's the same principle that we've educated town meeting about, and I think that's important. So I think it would be okay to put it off. I think there is an advantage to having everybody in the room at one point. And I think I would just want to confirm with him that he thinks that his contract would extend to the fall in terms of coming to meet with us. We haven't paid him yet for this report, so we still have him on the hook. We will pay him before the fall, and so I don't think it would be a problem, but I would just ask to have a chance to confirm with him that that would be his expectation.
Can I just maybe argue for Mary Lou's point that we try to get him in here earlier instead? In the sense that in the big meeting, specific questions get diluted. You know, this question of discount rate is so important and fundamental to the number. And to be quite frank, the 7% discount rate is just a stupid, old-fashioned discount rate. And he defends it like it's sacrosanct because he's got his chart to demonstrate that. And that, I'd love to see Anurag in a private meeting here. Let's beat him up a little bit about this and talk about what the real liability is and what the real liability is likely to be over this period of time. Because his pat presentation, to be quite frank, is canned. It's something that you can tell is he gives to audience after audience after audience. And I think having him in a smaller group might help us understand the assumptions more clearly and understand that those assumptions carry a lot of weight in terms of the way that number's calculated.
Do we know from the report what assumption he's making about the rate?
Yeah, it's all spelled out in there, and I forget the number, but it's 7 or 7.5 or something. It's in that range. I personally might argue with you about your point, but that's why we should have him in here and have a discussion, and lay everything out on the table and it's a worthwhile discussion. Really, it's, I think, just a matter of what's the most effective vehicle for educating.
Andy?
Yeah.
And you people both are in finance and I am not, but at this point, to me, that's immaterial in terms of just educating people that we have to begin to put money away, whether it's 3, 4, 5, 7%. And some people don't see it. They really believe that they can continue to put money annually in the budget to deal with the people now and not for the future. So those are probably very good discussions about the percentage, but I think to educate the whole board, they have to begin to think in terms of how we put money away as we do for pensions. So I don't know where that fits into your timetable, but if it's going to be in the fall, I think it needs to be early, before the schools start dealing with their budgets. Of course, as you say, there might be a whole difference in the fall, but I think it has to be before budget time.
Well, if we did it as part of the Four Towns meeting as we did last time, it's definitely before budget time because that's when the initial presentations are being made about the initial projections from the finance director for the development of a budget. So I think that we really do have two very different purposes in meeting with him set forth here, okay?
It could be, when he met with us before, I don't know if it's the same person.
No, it's a different person.
Different person. That's where we saw sort of the magnitude of the liability. And may have been for some of the people on the other boards a new idea. They've been hearing about this now from us and from other people for a while. I think at the least, if possible, we should have the 4 boards meeting in the fall. I think we should do this actually. Have a presentation of your revenue estimates and then a section on OPEB. And whether the consultant is the best person to present that or we are, I don't know. But I'm not, and then we have the consultant come to a smaller meeting, and like the idea of doing it April 25th, if he's available then, because then a little bit of the pressure's off when we've done the editing and proofreading of the report, and we can breathe for a little while.
It's just the Doug, and I think I signed or I said Doug.
Okay. I'd lean a little bit toward having it come sooner than later. The 25th is probably fine to us, I think, in that regard. I don't know. I think Kay's point's well taken that at the 4 boards meeting, I think the essential conversation and discussion that we could do, or perhaps you could do, I think that's fine. I think also given the other things that are going to be on people's minds with financial impact in the fall around regionalization and school-related things, then this might muddy the waters around that in the sense that because it will be a whole different calculation if we go to a regional system for K-12 or K-6 and 7, 12, that sort of thing. So I think that having a more detailed discussion earlier with with the consultant, and then not to say we don't then come back to it in the fall. I think that's also essential as well. So I would be inclined to seeing sooner than later, because I think
one thing, of course, is if it's not in his contract to come twice, we could always pay him to come a second time if it was valuable.
Right.
So, I think for relatively short money.
Yeah.
But Andy, at the 4 town meetings, the people who've been absent out there, turns out to be the school committee. And I don't know, I mean, there has to be a way.
The 4 boards meeting, at the 4 towns, 4 boards meeting.
I know,
Right. The school committee was.
no, they have not been coming to the meetings. And so we have to find a time when they are available. This group, I think, is convinced, I believe the select board is, so it would be the whole regional school committee that we need to somehow make sure they're there to hear, because it's the regional school committee that is not putting money aside right now. And I've been to their finance committee meetings, and Sandy went one year, and they're not totally convinced, some of them. So there has to be a way to get them to that meeting.
Yeah, I don't remember the attendance. You do. Interact.
I think it might be a good conversation for us to have about what do we want? What is our goal? What do you want to accomplish? Do you want to tell the departments to start putting this money into their operating budgets? Do we want to, do we have an endpoint that we would like us all to move? I mean, do we have an understanding, and at least in this group, and then finally this group plus the select board, of what it is that we really want to accomplish. So if the number is, whether the number is $94 million or 50 or 150 or $200 million, whatever it might be, do we want to slow down the growth? Do we want to reverse the growth of that number? I mean, what is it that we want? What do we want? Because we can always, I mean, I completely agree with Bob's point that the discount rate assumption is really important, because the numbers is extremely sensitive to, if you change the discount rate slightly, the number changes quite significantly. So of course there has to be some sensitivity, but we need to get a handle on so that becomes a technical discussion about what is the reasonable discount rate and why is that reasonable. But as a group, we gotta have some sense of what it is that we want to accomplish.
The politics of this is very difficult, and that's really what I think that we've got to come to terms with, because we have to convince both the town manager and the superintendent and library director and their policy boards that this is an absolute necessary thing to do in order to get their support to develop budgets that do what you suggest needs to be done. And the next step
is that an understanding of this group that needs to be done? I mean, that's my point of view, but I'm one voice, and the fact of the matter is, the departments, if they start putting the OPEB into their budgets, they're going to hurt. They already are hurting so bad, so they really have good reasons to oppose this. So, but is that what we really want to do?
But in the end, we can't force anything.
We cannot.
Which is the thing that we have to recognize, because ultimately, we recommend the budget to town meeting. Town meeting has to adopt the budget. So the final piece is not what we do or not what they do, but what town meeting does. And,
But we still have, I'm sorry, but we still have to have a position on it. I mean, it may not be politically feasible, but you know, even if it is not, in a frictionless world, if it was politically feasible, what would our position be?
okay,
I think our position has been up to now, and probably will be for the next couple of years. We're not to set a quota for people, but just to get the policymaking boards to the point where they realize they have to put something away for OPEB and get them to start doing it. It may be, I mean, we ourselves have not recommended yet putting, regularly adding it to the operating budget. I think we're probably gonna get to that point. But we need to start, we need to start small, because we haven't started at all. Well, the town has started now, but.
Well,
And I think, I mean, the discount rate, that's an interesting point and probably valid. Something else that could change the actuarial things is if these laws that have been proposed pass that would change retirement qualifications and such. That could mitigate the liability a little bit. So I think those are interesting points, and it's good for us to know about them and pay attention, but rather than focus on what you think may be a mistaken discount rate, I think we need to focus on getting the school committee, library trustees, and the budget, all the budget makers to acknowledge that they need to start putting money into OPEB.
and I'm sorry, Bob. What I hear from the school folks, that yeah, we understand there's a problem. We'll put $100,000 into it. And the S&P document says we should be putting about $8.2 million a year into it. So so putting $100,000 into it doesn't really do anything at all.
They didn't put anything into it. It's only if the holiday, what's it called? Premium holiday comes along, and even then, they're only recommending. The school committee hasn't bought into it yet.
Yeah.
Because they're looking at, the needs that they have with the budget dollars that they have.
So
Yeah.
they haven't decided.
Bob, let me.
You're right. I mean, the discussion of the discount rate and what the calculation is, accurate or not, is secondary to your point of how difficult the politics are here. I mean, one might say impossible at some level. And the thought I had the other day, see if this makes any sense at all, is that maybe given long-term adjustments in the way OPEB is calculated and dispensed ultimately, we may be stealing from our current budget at a level that is just never, ever gonna happen. And we should be spending, $1 million on Pine Street improvements instead, stuff that we can keep until the legislation fixes this mathematical problem, which, $100,000, let alone $1 million, let alone, 10, 15 teachers, let alone even a system change like we're talking about. I hate to throw up my hands and be completely cynical, but if you look at that math, it is not to be overcome. We are one of 5 municipalities in Massachusetts who's even created our account, or are there a lot more?
There's been much more of a trend. People have created trusts, but very few
Have funded them.
have funded them at the magic word is the ARC, annual required contribution. So that's a word you'll hear a lot from the actuary. That's our $8 million number. Maybe there are 2 or 3 communities that are doing that. The state is not doing that. The city of Boston is not doing that. There are a lot more who are doing best efforts, trying to show that they are making an effort to do this. But I think I mean, you're pointing out a really tricky problem here. How much are we willing, politics aside, how much would you, if you could just wave a magic wand, decide that you would move resources from the police or the schools into an account that really isn't gonna do anything for you for the next 30 years? Then you get into the politics, and then it gets
then
really
there's the
difficult.
morality of it too. The morality is a totally different layer, which is, you know, equally as important as all these considerations, which is that it's an obligation we promised to these employees who will either have retired or it's such a sticky issue, and it's embedded throughout the country, not just municipalities, but state and to some level federal. And I just don't know what you do at a municipal level to climb that wall with the school committee, to climb the wall with the library, to climb the wall. It just, these are very, steep cliffs.
But,
Doug?
so what I would suggest is and we've been doing this, and I think that this is one of those topics because of the complexity and elusiveness of it to some extent, because it is, these actuarial calculations are just that, they're estimates, they're guesses in some respects of what's going to happen with the cost of insurance, how many people are going to retire, how long are they going to live, and, all those kind of things. That's very intangible, it's not tangible to people, and so it's hard to have those conversations. But I think the point we've been, the sort of drum we've been beating, I think, is making its way into people's minds, is that this is a non-zero number, and it's going to start to become significant. We're not sure exactly when that's going to happen. If our insurance rates were, if our insurance costs were suddenly to go 15% for the next 5 years, you would be able to immediately say what we're not funding because insurance has done X. We've held it at zero in the last couple of years, so it's hard to we can still demonstrate that to some extent. It's like, well, because we're spending this on our pay-as-you-go methodology, and this much of it is for retirees, that money's not being used for these other things. And so the idea of that being, that starting to consume the budget, I think people are getting that notion. I think that's more of the sales pitch we make at this point. And again, I agree, $100,000 here or there, in real dollars that we're going to end up owing is not significant, but the point is to sort of continue to build that inertia. I think that's our messages, and I think that's our key role in this, even in the political process, is to continue to sort of bang that drum, not that the sky's falling, but that this is real, and it's non-zero, and it's significant, and it'll become more and more significant, and yes, there are things that will mitigate. I think the particular legislation that's in front of the House right now is one piece that potentially could mitigate that a little bit. Other actions, federal healthcare legislation or changes to it, changes to entitlement programs, Medicare, Medicaid, those will all have impacts on what this looks like in the future for us. So it's all those things play into it. But I think that continuing the mantra of, the seriousness of it, the fact that it is continuing every year to take a bigger chunk of our budget that's not spent on educating our children or paving our roads or maintaining our sewer systems and our capital items, that's just going to continue to grow. And so I think our primary message is to continue to beat that drum, and as we do that, build that inertia, there'll be more motivation to start chiseling away, putting a little bit of money away, even if it's insignificant in the real dollars that are going to be owed. It's still not zero, and we start to build to a place. And it may be that 5-8 years from now, the state will mandate, much like they do with the pension system, to force the communities into real dollar investments into that retirement.
So my last point is that what would be a very valuable exercise to do today is to guess about what the politics will be, to guess about what the very generous discount rate, let's go even to 9 or 10, and then look at extending, moving up the retirement age, changing some of the benefit criteria, and looking at how you can minimize that payment, but get to some assessment, assumption, and estimate of it that looks like it might actually be funding it currently. Again, very generous assumptions. And it may, for the municipal budget, just be $1.5 million, $2 million a year. And you put that in there, and you say, you know what, we think things are going to change. You put that number in there, and that's what we're going to fund every year. It's in there like a rock. and you set an example, and eventually you get the school committee or whoever to kind of, come along, but at least it's a number that you can sleep a little bit, because you say, if things go our way, we're actually funding this on the current level.
Yeah.
I know this is the manager's budget, library's budget, school budget, but after we get the revenue projections in the fall, is there any reason we can't say, well, not 3%, we're gonna hold everybody at 2% and keep extra money in reserve, and then come spring, move that money into the trust fund? I mean, I don't know if, it probably sounds like that you can't do that, but it
No,
might
I
be
don't
a
think
way.
that you can do that, whether you can do it, the politics of doing that are difficult, but certainly the structure is set up for us to do that when we adopt the preliminary guidelines in the fall. Sandy's even started putting in a line for OPEB trust contribution, and we could just say, okay, we need to fund that at $1 million, and therefore, I'm just making a number up. We're going to proportionately reduce the increases for everybody, because capital and operating budgets, because we need to fund that. So, yeah, we can do that. I think that we really would need to be very politic in dealing with it, which is really what part of the role of the budget coordinating group is to allow us to consult and work that politics better than, because what we don't want to do is end up with not having brought them along and then having proponents of schools, library, police, whatever, all asking for amendments on the floor of town meeting to our budget because we've underfunded them and make this all a town meeting fight. We want to try and get consensus before we get to town meeting so that we don't have that happen.
I think to build a consensus, we have to clearly articulate what the problem is and what the implications of the problem are. And I think and a couple, at least 2 or 3 jump right off. One is, first of all, like it or not, S&P has started noticing this. And so it is going to affect our, sooner or later, our credit rating. And that's going to be the cost of borrowing is going to be affected by it. So there's a very tangible near-term impact of why we need to do something about it. Second of all, it's a real, it's a cost to the property owners in town, which is just not visible right now. Because sooner or later the taxes have to kind of go up to accommodate this. Because the operating budgets are not going to be able to deal with this, and so if you're going to have even minimum level of services, the taxes will have to go up. So this is a cost to the 95% of the members of the town meeting are property owners, and I think they will hear this. That the cost of to all the property, this is the cost to all the property owners they are not aware of, and it's going to come to them very, very quickly. And third of all, the idea of somebody from outside, some benevolent dictator coming and solving this problem for us, that would be nice. But if it doesn't happen, then we are still, this problem is we are passing it on to the future generations. So I think we need to make a case why it is important that we have to do this and relate this problem to the people who are going to be voting on this on a personal basis. And I would say we should, as an appointed body to oversee the financial risk to the town, I think we should probably take a fairly clear position on this. We should say that out to some in some manner. Maybe we can do what Bob is suggesting, that we get started to make the number seem manageable to us for the time being, and get started on this by putting $1.5 million over there. But I think we should take a fairly strong position on this, because it is our obligation to keep the town out of harm's way financially.
Frankly, I think putting out some of those ideas in a conversation with the actuary and getting his feedback on some of that stuff, it would be an important conversation to have. I mean, if we said to him, all right, what if we put $1 million a year aside? What does that do for us? And hearing what he has to say, I think, is important. I think, Bob, to some of your questions about what the different scenarios look like. I mean, frankly, it's a pretty sophisticated analysis that I have not seen from any other community to really be able to go, well, let's do all the what ifs if we, that gets to be complicated. But I think being able to touch on some of those what ifs with the actuary, again, is the kind of conversation, it's a directional conversation. It's not going to give us a new number, but I think it's going to give us an appreciation for.
Well, I'm imagining, I think about the way one uses consultants. And in this case, you might be it's a somewhat of a stealthy type of conversation. It's nothing that is going to be made public necessarily. You said, okay, so here's your regression equation. Here are the 4 places that really matter. And if we change these assumptions, what number is spat out for us on our back end? And that at least informs us about a lower number that's more manageable politically that we feel at some level might actually come true, might be the number.
And in his report, there is some sensitivity analysis. He does play with different discount rates, and if this changes by 1%, what's the effect on the overall number? So you'll see some of that, but we could maybe suss out a little bit more.
So the question still comes back to, is it helpful enough for us to have this end of April meeting with the actuary at this point so we can raise that? And how does that balance out between with the desire to have somebody who, because I do think that somebody from the outside always ends up having a little bit more credibility than sometimes than we can have ourselves. Will that credibility be important?
So I'm changing my tune. I'm going back to the case. I think the general consensus probably better to have more there. The presentation made, as a public presentation, given what Doug just said about how trying to push the boulder in a direction.
Well, now I'm going to change my mind. I think we should have him come in sooner than later.
Okay.
See how useful it is for us. And as I say, if we really think it's worth having back in the fall, we can always pay him to come back. It's just money.
It's not ours.
Yeah, compared to $8 million a year,
$8 million, it's a drop in the bucket.
it's nothing.
It's
It's
a
a
very
rounding
small
error.
one of ours, right?
Sally, how big a trouble are we in compared to other people in the state?
We are, well, everybody's in the same boat. I think we have probably slightly lower health care costs than Eastern Mass, so we're a little better off that way. We have a relatively generous, but it all depends who you compare yourself to. Whether you compare yourself to cities or towns, Eastern Mass, Western Mass, when we pay 75 or 80% of the costs for a pretty good benefits package. Cities typically are paying 80 or more percent, although there's been some fights about that. Some towns pay 50%. So you have to kind of compare yourself that way. So I would say we're probably about in the middle on that spectrum in terms of what our benefits package is compared to other cities and towns.
No, in terms of if you want to use a metric, just off the cuff metric, which is the OPEB liability divided by the annual budget. If you took that number, and I don't know if that's the correct metric or not, but if you took that number and spread that on a spreadsheet for all the towns in the state, where would we fall? Would we fall to near the top or near the bottom?
I haven't done that exercise, nor have I seen that. I mean, we could.
Because what I'm thinking is like, if
Can I just interrupt and
Sorry.
say one other thing? So starting this December, cities and towns are gonna have to report their OPEB liabilities to the state. And there will start to be a central database for those kind of data. You'll be able to know what everybody's OPEB liability is. Right now, we can hunt and peck and go to websites and hope to find it, but it's not generally out there. But it's evolving so that the state will start to collect that and start to report that data, those data starting this fall or this December.
So I think that would be a useful thing to know, because if we are, if the problem is an absolute problem and a relative problem, and a relative problem is helpful to us in the sense that if other people are in worse off situation, then maybe we will benefit from some kind of a political solution to it. But the absolute problem still remains, which means that the S&P is watching, and it's going to be a tax. It's an invisible cost to the property owners over the long run. So the absolute problem still remains.
Well, the state at some point is going to have to do something, because if the S&P forces the issue and the Accounting Standards Board presses the issue, it's going to be out there and have to be dealt with, because the state can't put all of its municipalities in a position where it can't borrow money, and it can't, and that would be the inevitable consequence if nothing is done. The state then questions, what would the state do if it was finally got around to dealing with it, and it's probably going to end up being some combination of legislating that towns have to do something, or providing some assistance to help the towns do something, or a combination. But I don't know what else is
Or
out there.
making retirees pay more for their health insurance, and
That's true. They could do that, and they probably will.
and that's what, I mean, that is what is happening, that's what's been proposed by the governor and by this OPEB commission. Let's see if it actually gets enacted.
Yeah.
And if they force us to start putting money into it, that's going to be at some point a huge hole in the budget.
That's right, and so and the question that somebody is going to ask logically is, communities that voluntarily do that, will they then get credit for it at that point in time, or will the requirement be above and beyond anything you've already put in, so that the pain that we would be voluntarily incurring now becomes useless? I think that would be an argument that somebody might make.
But that question is unanswerable. We can answer that question.
So let's answer the question of when you want to meet with this guy.
Yes, James.
I kind of think it's good for us to meet with them, because we'll ask different kind of questions. And it's a smaller group, and I think we could get more out of it. And then if we think he's good and would be willing to come back, then we can have him with the bigger group in the fall.
Yeah, I think that the understanding that we had established with Stephanie O'Keefe was that she thought that it would be okay for us to go ahead and schedule a meeting as a finance committee meeting and just notify the select board, and invite select board members to attend our meeting. She didn't know that there would be a large number that came, but that was her statement on the topic. So, do I take it then that the consensus is evolving to going ahead and scheduling it for the last Thursday in April, after the 25th?
Can we get some materials ahead of time to prepare for it?
Yeah.
I will, I already put in here to remind myself at 9 a.m. tomorrow to email you the actuarial report, so you will have it in your mailboxes tomorrow. or I can make paper copies for anybody who wants it.
Since I'm not an actuary and I really honestly have never seen an actuarial report, I guess I'll probably have to email some of you to help answer some questions so I can understand it.
I would be shocked if you didn't have questions.
Okay.
And some of them forward to me, and I can try to answer them, and then some of them will just.
It's maybe as dumb as like, what does this mean? You know.
Okay, so I think we have a plan of action then. Agreed?
Yep.
Okay. New information affecting budget, you had one item.
Yes.
Said you were gonna talk, maybe you have two, because John reached an agreement with the university that has a budget impact.
He did, well, it has an indirect budget impact. The one thing I was gonna talk about was the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group. Has been meeting and has recommended that there be an increase in staffing for enforcement of zoning and rental registration and so forth. This is a draft recommendation. The town manager has not formally adopted this as his own proposal. But I just wanted to give you a heads up. There's nothing to discuss tonight because these numbers are still kind of coming together. And as I say, John hasn't made a formal proposal yet. But the general idea from the Safe and Healthy Neighborhood Working Group is that more work needs to be done to monitor these rental properties. There's a rental property registration proposal bylaw that's going to be put forward by this group. There's also a petition article on this issue, and the long and the short of it is this working group has recommended adding a new code enforcement officer, an administrative position. It would be paid for by fees levied on rental properties. Right now they're proposing a $100 fee per property per year. That would raise about $157,000 on an annual basis, which would cover the cost of these new staff positions. So what this is going to mean for the Finance Committee and for the budget is again, you will hear one of the articles, or two of the articles, a petition article and a non-petition article on the rental registration process. Assuming that goes through, there would be a change to the dollars recommended in the green budget book. There would be staff added either to, right now it's being batted back and forth as to whether it goes into the health department or it goes into the inspection department, and that's got to be worked out. But one of those departments would have more staff, and so there'd be a different budget recommendation. So I wanted to give you a heads up about it because it's going to be coming, but it's still in its formative processes now.
Okay. Questions at this point? Doug?
Does the cost for personnel include their OPEB obligation? I had to put that out there, I'm sorry.
Cross that on. There is, no.
You know, I somewhat say that in jest, but in some ways it's not an invaluable thing to do in the sense that having a sense of what that number looks like for an employee, if you hire an employee, sort of what pieces that look like, you know, as part of the benefits package. I mean, just to have a sense of it. I mean, and it's hard to know because some will depend on whether they're 25 or 55 and where else they worked and all sorts of other things. But I mean, you know, like the schools often when they hire a teacher, they have a round number because on average the teaching salary that comes in is at this level. Sometimes it's above that, sometimes below that, but gives you a sense of a placeholder. And I think that, you know, the point I'm really making is that we may want to start thinking in those terms too.
Right, that's a good point.
Okay.
I'm sure they're still talking about this, but $100 per property per year doesn't seem to differentiate among rental of one apartment versus rental of a
6 apartment house versus.
Well, you know, and that is still under discussion.
Just their stuff, yeah, good, okay.
So that's just a heads up on that. You'll see more on this, but I didn't want to drop it on you at the last minute, so I wanted to give you a heads up.
And do I take it from the news article today, the news item about the agreement with the university, that the university is increasing its contribution, which would actually show up as additional revenue in FY14, but would also increase or would it be 13, and would increase the expenses in fire?
All I've seen is the news article. John was not around this afternoon, so I haven't gotten the details from him. However, details is a good word to use because one of the things we had been talking about was having them, you know, they hire detail ambulances already. They sit at the Mullen Center when there are, they're like police details, and the money for that goes into what's called an agency account. It's sort of like a revolving fund. In other words, if you hire a police detail, you put the money into this account and then we pay the officers. It's the same thing with these ambulances. At least that's the model that we were talking about ahead of time, that UMass would pay into this detail account. That money would be used to pay the time of those officers as if they were on a detail. It doesn't affect the bottom line budget for the department or our revenues because it kind of goes into this separate pot. Again, I haven't seen the final details.
So why don't we confirm that in the next meeting or at another meeting after you've gotten more information? Yeah. Yes, Janice.
I heard a report on NPR News, which I just happened to be listening to at 6 o'clock, and John was on it, or, recording on him, that said we were getting $40,000.
Again, I don't know where that's flowing, whether that's going through this detail account or details.
So that's the question that we need more information on in the subsequent meeting. Anything else?
Just a couple of other things I wanted to mention. The audit committee is meeting next week. A representative from the finance committee is Bob.
Can you give me that date again?
It's Wednesday at I think 3:30, and I don't think you're going to be able to make it.
Yes.
So I don't know if anybody else wanted to go in his place or what, but it is when the auditors are going to come in and review the FY12 results.
Wednesday what's the date of Wednesday? 3/27.
7.
Yeah. While you're looking that up, I'll also mention one other quick thing. We pulled the retired teachers out of the GIC and brought them into the town. Mm-hmm. It used to be that we would get an assessment from the state for that because they were in the state system. So in the current year, we had very good news, and that is there was going to be no assessment at all because we had basically built up a credit. And then let's see, Wednesday we got a check from the state, which was a refund of that credit amount. So not only did we have no assessment, but we got a refund. It was $85,000 to the town and $15,000 to the region for as the result of pulling those teachers out of the GIC. So.
Okay.
That's right.
Well, I think what we would do is we take it in as revenue now and have it become free cash, and then at fall town meeting or next town meeting we could use it. But I think it's a good thought.
Doesn't go into the insurance trust?
No, it's not into the trust. It's because it's an assessment to us on the cherry sheet.
Okay.
So that was $15K to the region and
85.
85 to the town.
15,000.
So it's 100,000 total.
Okay.
If I may just back to the audit committee meeting, I might be able to make that. I will confirm tomorrow.
Okay, I
That's
will.
okay.
The audit is on the town website now. We put it up there under the accounting office under finance, so you can look at the audit.
Well, thank you, Doug. If you do, I apologize just to the committee as usual here. it's a great gig though, the audit committee. It really is. It's fun.
Gives you credit and it only means once.
And the most work.
You're not supposed to read me like a book.
But I'm letting Doug have that. You're letting Doug have that. Okay, I'm going to move along because it's after 10 o'clock and I really want to not let our meetings get longer than that. Are there any, the next item was on by mistake because we already took care of that at a previous meeting, the FY13 quarter review, second quarter review. So, member reports, anything people want to say? Go quick, yes,
The
Kay.
JCPC didn't meet today due to technical problems, but we have heard all of the requests and we, except for two that Sandy is suggesting now, moving up a fire pumper and a large DPW truck, which we're in for FY15, moving them into the FY14 budget and borrowing for them next February. So we can take advantage of what we hope will still be lower interest rates, but JCPC hasn't considered that yet. That's gonna be on our agenda next week. And we hope we'll finish and vote our plan next week.
Janice?
I went to the library trustees meeting last week and you voted their budget as they talked about, when they came to see us. They increased the state aid line to 83,000 or so. And I think the director's planning to come to our meeting next week.
No,
She's not.
She doesn't need to.
just need
She
to.
was talking about coming.
I'll talk with you.
But can we get copies of that budget? I think we, I don't know, not yet.
The updated one.
Ah, I need
It
one.
is, by the way, off by, off by $1, which I discussed with Sharon, so.
Dollar over or under?
Yes.
Why don't I have Janice talk to Sandy about the desirability of having her come and the three of us can confer about that as opposed to deciding that now. We need to talk about it afterwards because I want to let Amherst Media go and I want to get her doing the meeting as quickly as possible.
I just want to mention that $1 will make it 94 million years before you pay it off.
Thank you. This is an important point, though. Let's postpone minutes and,
See, it's moving fast. Yeah.
well, I know, but I'm really trying to let Amherst Media go and to get us out of here 10:15. And I do think it will be fast next time. Okay.
Move adjourn.
We are adjourned at 10:15, and thank you very much.